Chapter 1625. With that, Mimiron waved his hand, and a huge circular metal trapdoor on the ground opened. Amidst the roar, a gigantic humanoid robot rose from above. It was so huge that it affected the appearance of the city. Its body was mainly yellow, and its lower body was another flaming beast. Its body was like a big ball, but there was an octagonal glass porthole on its chest. Of course, that wasn't a real porthole. Duque could cut it out. Although it looked like Mimiron was sitting behind the porthole, it was actually just a display screen. The robot's head was round, and it had two light blue hexagonal eyes. It also had a pair of nondescript mechanical arms with 5 fingers. In any case, this thing looked really bad. Thinking about it, this thing was another flaming beast MKI, a laser launcher VX-001, and a simple combination of the air command unit, which would normally only appear in the 3rd stage and had the same bird-like shape as Mimiron's head. Together, it was called Humanoid Combat Weapon V0L7R0N. In the Alliance camp, apart from Magni and Bulang, who didn't know what aesthetics were, everyone else looked like they couldn't believe their eyes. Right? It was 2F** King Ugly. Duque estimated that if this thing was made into an anime on Earth, it probably wouldn't sell well even in the least developed Celestial Empire in the 80s. Ugly as it was, this thing's combat power was top-notch. This was because this robot had all the weapons and equipment of the previous 3 parts. His life goal was to use technology to slay a god. This was a description of someone like Mimiron. Although its power wasn't enough to kill Yogg-Saron directly, it was definitely a great help. Duque's face twitched. He had to say that this was an unexpected surprise. The huge robot that should have been dismantled by the Alliance army in the battle had now become a loyal subject and rejoined the ranks of the Alliance army. Duque appeared on the shoulder of the huge robot in a flash. He noticed something that looked like a camera, so he raised his hand and projected the image of a Gundam unicorn in his hand. The camera kept flashing, and Mimiron's voice came immediately. "Do you like inventing and creating too?" "Unfortunately, I don't have the time today. Let's find a chance to have a good chat after we get rid of Yogg-Saron." "That's great." Mimiron's voice was filled with excitement. "We share the same interests. We're on the same path. My path is not lonely." Even if he was being controlled, Mimiron still had his previous memories. He suddenly thought he understood how Duque was able to catch him so accurately when he was changing mecha. If he wasn't from my robot faction, how could he possibly have such foresight? If not for the sense of duty that the Titan had planted in his heart driving Mimiron, he would probably have dragged Duque along without a care and chatted with him for 10 days to half a month. The Alliance leaders were all stunned. "That's it?" Jaina appeared beside Duque and asked. Duque shrugged. "What else do you want? Fight for 300 rounds and then wait for Yogg-Saron to come out and kill us all?" Boom. The foot of the robot was made up of the flaming beasts. The 4 huge wheels looked out of place before, but now that they were in the robot's territory, the proportions were very correct. As the robot that Mimiron piloted took the lead and arrived at the center of the Guardian's Temple area, Duque suddenly realized that the other 2 sides were almost done at the same time. 2 huge figures were walking out of their respective temples. Thump, thump, thump. Servanas was standing on the shoulder of the female giant Freya, the guardian of the Temple of Life. The Blood Elf Queen held Freya's neck with one hand majestically, allowing the strong wind that was stirred up by the female giant's strides to blow against her face and cloak. Next to her, Hodier, the guardian of the Ice Temple, was about the same. He didn't have Freya's regenerative ability, so he looked even more pathetic. There were many huge claw marks and damage on his shoulder armor. However, his eyes were shockingly bright, and the deep blue color made people panic. On his left and right shoulders stood 2 graceful beauties. Onyxia had the air of a countess, her left hand supporting her right elbow and her right hand holding a goose feather fan dyed black. Half of her face was covered by a lute, and she smiled smugly. Vashj returned to her maid's appearance, her hands crossed on her abdomen, looking like a maid who was ready to take orders at any time. But there shouldn't be any maid who would be so arrogant as to stand on the shoulder of a guardian. In front of outsiders, Onyxia and Vashj naturally gave Duque enough face. With a small jump, they landed on the ground and bowed to Duque. "Master, I'm glad that I didn't disappoint you. Well done." Duque praised them calmly. In the Alliance hero group, Hof Iriel stuck out his tongue, as if complaining that he had 2 demigods as servants. Duque really had no one else. "I'm done here too." Queen Sylvanas tapped her toes, and a gust of wind carried her down. Many of the Alliance's powerhouses noticed that Freya's expression seemed to be a little strange. Freya walked past Torim, who seemed to have withered up and was almost dead. A pair of huge and graceful palms pressed on Torim's chest, and a surging green brilliance was sent in just like that. The effect was immediate. Torim, who looked like he had used up all his energy and was about to become a weathered stone statue, began to tremble violently. A few seconds later, he coughed 3 times and spat out a large black, sticky ball of liquid. Freya? You're awake?" Freya bit her lip. Thanks to the demigod of wind, Sylvanas Windrunner, she used a special method to wake me up. "You guys?" Torim still did not seem to believe his eyes. He looked at Hodier, who was a little disheveled, and Mimiron, who looked fine. "I've recovered." Hodier's face was cold. "I don't want to talk about it." Mimiron's metal face did not have any expression at all. There seemed to be electricity surging back and forth between the 4 guardians. That was the unique telepathic communication between the guardians. Hodier was the first to speak. "Mortals and the demigods of Azeroth, thank you for your help." Freya continued, "Although we'd like to say it, the next thing is about Guardian Odor." Mimiron said, "Obviously, the 4 of us together will not be a match for Yogg-Saron." Torim said in a low voice, "Can we ask for your help again?" Duque exchanged glances with the Alliance's powerhouses and smiled. His voice shook the mountains and rivers. "For Azeroth, it is our duty." Chapter 1626. Yogg-Saron, the Beast of 1,000 Throats. How powerful was there's a silly dragon? In history, without the help of the 4 Guardians of Odor, the chance of defeating this ancient god was 0. Not infinitely close to 0, but absolutely 0. Its true strength did not lie in its terrifying elemental attacks, nor did it lie in its god-level physical attacks that could destroy a city with one slap. Yogg-Saron's strength lay in its mental retardation, which was the legendary monkey's mental subtraction, passed down from generation to generation. As an ancient god who was the best at control, Yogg-Saron could use all kinds of dirty methods and attacks to attack the enemy's will. As long as someone's will collapsed and their intelligence dropped to 0, they would completely become Yogg-Saron's soul slave. Unless their soul was completely destroyed, even if they became an undead, they would still be loyal to Yogg-Saron. This was the so-called, "you can't keep your intelligence even if you leave the group." It was not easy to nurture a strong person. From a weak elite, to cross the red line of hero, to a legendary hero, and then to a demigod, it was more than 1 in a million. Not to mention anything else, no matter who died in the Alliance, Duque would die of heartache. However, the few ancient gods took turns to court death. If he did not beat these guys to death, Azeroth would not have a day of peace. Duque felt a little weak. Other than that, Yogg-Saron's style of play was essentially quite restrained against Duque, who was not strong-willed. Although Duque had grown up and could absorb the moral integrity of the saints as a supplement to his will, Duque was still a vulgar person who loved to have a harem and start showing off. If Yogg-Saron found Duque's weakness, it was unknown what would happen to Duque after Duque's mental barrier made by the system elves failed. Duque bit the bullet. With the 4 guardians gathered, Freya was the first to speak. The female giant said, "As long as I can free up my hands, I will help heal everyone. And I know that everyone is most worried about being controlled by Yogg-Saron and losing your mind again. I just contacted Odor's main control computer and loaded a part of the Clean Lorcan's ability. I can summon a few wells of wisdom in battle. As long as you're beside this well, everyone's mind will be nourished and the side effects of Yogg-Saron's mental attack will be reduced." Freya changed the topic. "I can use the Titan runic magic circle to calm everyone's mind. In return, it will weaken everyone's control over their own power." I estimate that the circulation speed of magic circuits for mages will be reduced by at least 30%. Duque secretly complained, "It's more like half." With Freya taking the lead, the other guardians did not hold back. Torim swung his hammer. "I will use Titan Storm to attack all enemies." At the same time, a Titan rune magic circle opened under Torim's feet. Within the purple lightning, almost everyone could feel that their life force was in a very mysterious and exuberant state. Duque was the only one who noticed that his HP had increased by at least 20%. This was Torim's secret skill, Thorim's tenacity. "When you're in danger, I will use my ice to protect you," Hodor said in a low voice. With a stomp of his foot, every Alliance powerhouse present, including demigods like Duque, had a translucent thing that looked like an ice shield appear on the outside of their bodies. Hodor's strength: reduce the speed of the enemy and reduce injuries. It's that simple and violent. Mimiron, who was in the huge robot, clapped his metal palm, and a palm-sized hemispherical platform rose up around the hall. A large pile of metal beads rolled out and quickly rolled to the side of every powerhouse's combat boots. With a click, they buckled onto the boots. Mimiron's divine speed can increase your running speed by 20%. The great inventor forcefully promoted his invention with certainty. "Don't tell me it's something like goblin rocket boots?" After saying that, he seemed to want to dig out the metal beads on the left and right sides of the boots. "Don't confuse my great invention with the goblin's idiotic things." Mimiron was annoyed. Goblin rocket boots had once been very popular in the Alliance. In theory, as long as the two spurs at the back of the boots touched each other, one's running speed would increase by more than 50%. However, it was made by goblins who killed people and set fire to gold. The goblin success rate was really F***king touching. Not to mention the more than 50% chance of exploding, just the acceleration alone was enough to make people who weren't used to it despair. That was to tie 2 rockets to the heels of each shoe. Once they were activated and you couldn't maintain your balance, you would fly to who knows where. The scariest thing was that there was once an unlucky guy who experimented with the rocket boots, and his whole body was torn in half. In response to Magni's worry, Duque coughed twice. The greatest inventor's invention is definitely not a problem. Duque helped. Mimiron, this simple-minded guy with super high IQ and EQ, had a good impression of Duque on the spot. "You know me best." After a short rest, with the 4 guardians taking the lead, the group marched in the direction of the Stairway of Madness. Soon, everyone saw the 4 guardians happily playing a sadistic game. Done?" Alcavan grinned. "Done." Still standing on the shoulder of Mimiron's robot, Duque nodded. "Then you're useless." The Flame Guardian, Corellon, was the most ruthless General Vezix. He jumped on the spot. What kind of momentum would a 10-story tall giant have when he jumped up? Even a landslide would be nothing more than this. Corellon, who had gathered all the fire elements on his feet, fiercely kicked the ugly head of the general. The general's head exploded. There was no blood and flesh splattering everywhere. All the flesh and blood were instantly burned by the flames on Corellon's feet. Corellon, who was disgusted, was still worried. He burned the general's corpse with a fire. Every powerhouse of the Alliance snorted when they walked past the general's corpse. However, everyone knew that the real enemy was still in the crazy stairs. Every powerhouse's heart was heavy when it came to Yogg-Saron. The Guardians felt guilty for their dereliction of duty, while some of the Alliance powerhouses were a little emotional. "Big brother, is Yogg-Saron the guy who spread the curse of flesh and blood?" Bulang asked. In a sense, the appearance of the various races in Azeroth was also a byproduct of the curse of flesh and blood spread by Yogg-Saron to weaken the Titan creations. "I don't recognize this guy as the ancestor of the dwarves," Magni said fiercely. Chapter 1627. The Stairway of Madness. When Duque and his entourage entered this area in order, they did not know how to describe this place. The surrounding scenery was similar to the Guardians' Shrine District. It was still a gigantic palace built with giants as the standard. Everyone was here to slay the evil god. When they saw the gigantic Greek pillar that required dozens of people to wrap their arms around it, they had already gotten used to it. The shrine was still the same shrine, but the aura and atmosphere in the air were completely different. Everyone thought that this place would feel like Angela or the Hacker Shrine, filled with traces of worship for the evil god. Who would have thought that it was not like that at all? The surroundings were filled with a transparent aura, spreading a slight sense of joy. This feeling was very faint, so faint that it was almost undetectable. However, Duque was very cautious. As a transmigrator, he had seen countless horror films and was well-versed in the success of horror films. If the opening scene was filled with a terrifying atmosphere of death, then the horror film was destined to fail at the box office. From normal to terrifying, it was a single portion. From happiness to terror and despair, it was not a double portion, but 4 or even 10 times the impact. This was the psychological difference from heaven to hell. Therefore, the pace rule was to first create a joyous and peaceful atmosphere. Duque looked around. He thought that someone would notice it. Who knew that the calm wise ones did not see a single one, but the hoof in the middle of the waves did. La 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 la. Immortal skipped forward in a relaxed and joyful manner. That special, slightly crooked S-shaped leg was like a small spring. Its light posture reminded Duque of a primary school student carrying a small backpack to school on his first day. When worn on a hoof, it was like, I didn't take my medicine today, I feel cute. What the hell is cute? Duque was annoyed. Duque was furious. Without another word, he went up and grabbed the hoof's little tail that was swinging around. Ah! The hoof cried out in shock. Then, Duque gave its butt a flying kick, and it almost fell flat on its face. Duque, what are you doing? He didn't call Duque by his title. His hoof had improved. If he called Duque Commander, that would be fair to fair. Shadan, there's something wrong with the air. The moment Duque's voice fell, the experts of the Alliance all reacted in unison. Magni and the other scientists immediately took out gas masks from their storage space bags. Jaina had already activated Frost Barrier. In one breath, she expanded the barrier by 100 times, enveloping the entire Alliance hero group. She was already a Breaking Dawn, so this wasn't too much of a burden. Duque shook his head and said with a frown, No, stop all of them. These things are useless. What I mean is that there's a strange spiritual energy in the surrounding air. Magni put away his gas mask, and Gianna retracted her shield. Theon and the others didn't understand. Do a lot of people feel a little happy and delighted? A little. Everyone thought about it. The calmer and more determined a person is, the less likely they are to be influenced. Everyone understood what Duke was trying to say. I don't get it, Magni said with a frown. Theon, Gavin Rad, Merid, Riadaline, and Imriel are all holy knights. The other 4 don't feel anything. Even if they don't believe in the holy light, they only feel a little excited. Why is it only Imriel? Imriel also seemed to realize that she was wrong. She covered her butt and stood there like she was wronged. She didn't dare to complain about Duque kicking her butt. Duque pressed a hand on Imriel's head. Didn't you notice? This fellow is the youngest. When Duque said the answer, Ilucia and Kalia felt like arrows were shot in their hearts. From the perspective of humans, the elves and dwarves present were most likely old demons. In terms of age, these human females were all aunties. However, after gaining immortality, they ignored the age limit. Eternally 18, eternally beautiful like a flower. Even if the age of one's body was fixed, the gradual increase in age and experience would ultimately make one more mature. Hoof was the only one. Although she was already the leader, deep down, she was still a real girl. Duque suddenly felt a little envious of the Drenii. Their bodies grew up very early, and then it was an extremely long period of youth. When they finally died of old age, their bodies would rapidly deteriorate. Coupled with their amazing magic and combat talents, they were a natural-born warrior race. Duque looked at the aggrieved Hoof and sighed. At least he comforted her. It's okay. It's not a fault to be young, and none of us are against you. It's just that when we fight Yogg-Saron, anyone who is not strong-willed or has a gap in their heart may be targeted by Yogg-Saron. Perhaps when they are under mental attack, they will do a lot of shameful things. When that time comes, please forgive them. Merid walked up and bowed deeply to Duque with his burly body. Thank you for the reminder, Lord Commander. It's better to make a small mistake now than to make a fatal mistake when facing a strong enemy later. Our leader is young and impulsive and needs your care and guidance. With that, he almost pressed down on the hoof's head and bowed to Duque again. The hoof was aggrieved but did as he was told. There was no helping it. Merid was appointed by Valen as the Minister of Orders, and was responsible for guiding and supervising her. Merid would never argue with the hoof over the big issues, but he would firmly punish her when she occasionally went off the track. The hoof was a little afraid of Merid. On the surface, Duque accepted Merid's gratitude calmly. He was also very satisfied with the effect of making an example out of Merid, but on the inside, he was a little pained. I'm not afraid of anything happening to the hoof, but I'm afraid of something happening to me. Duque was not afraid of simple head-on actions. But the mental attack of an ancient god and whatnot, it should be fine. After a little mobilization, everyone finally passed through the hall that was supposed to be General Vezek's stronghold and arrived at the top of the Stairway of Madness, the greatest temple of terror in Order. There was no sign of Yogg-Saron in the huge arch-temple that could fit several football fields. Everyone's eyes were on the Vrykul woman of unknown origin in the middle of the temple hall. It was a beautiful woman wearing a dark yellow shirt that exposed her navel and a dark green dress. Under his dark brown hair was a simple silver hairband, which served as a foil to his upright and handsome face. Since she was a Vrykul with a quasi-giant body, she was naturally not a pretty girl. She was at least 3 meters tall. Who was she? Chapter 1628. She calls herself Sala. She's the messenger of Yogg-Saron's will. She once claimed to be the so-called Master's Messenger. Freya, the guardian of the Church of Life, said through gritted teeth. Yogg-Saron's brainwashing was perfect. Even the memories of being enslaved still echoed clearly in the minds of the guardians. This was definitely a stain that they would never be able to erase for the rest of their lives. If it wasn't for the duty that was much more important than their own lives and their souls, there might really be some guardians who would choose to commit suicide to wash away their stain. Freya's words had angered Hodier and Mimiron. The chill around Hodier's body suddenly increased. Mimiron was even more direct. His huge robot had already begun charging. Even 100 meters away, one could clearly hear the mechanical sound of gears turning from slow to fast and accelerating. You traitors! How dare you come back? Didn't I ask you to guard this great temple? Sala spoke in a majestic female voice. It was quite uncomfortable to the ears of Duque and the others, like a male duck preparing to give a concert. For Freya and the others, it was a slap in the face. Hodier took a step forward, his voice like thunder. We are the servants of the great Pantheon Titan, not the slaves of your dirty and disgusting master. We will make Yogg-Saron pay the price. This is none of your business. Get Yogg-Saron out. Ha! Sala let out a rough laugh. Lowly slaves of the Pantheon. Whose slaves do you think aren't slaves? You used to be my slaves. Even if you break free for a while, even if you bring companions who think they are strong. But I want to tell you, you and your companions will all become my slaves. Ha! She actually used I to address them? Could she be? Duque's face was as dark as water. Everyone, don't be careless. This woman named Sala is the incarnation of the ancient evil god Yogg-Saron. No one knew how powerful the incarnation of an evil god was. Presumably, the guardians wouldn't mind beating her up as Yogg-Saron. Accept your punishment, evil god's incarnation. The most irascible Thunder Guardian Torim was the first to speak. At this moment, he had transformed into the god of hammers. He took the lead and raised the hammer that was filled with dazzling lightning. With a leap slash, he smashed the hammer into the ground. Duque reached out to stop Torim, but he had only said one word when Torim jumped over him. *CK. At this moment, Sarah was invincible. Impulsiveness is the devil. In fact, it wasn't just Duque. Freya and the other two guardians had also noticed the problem. That tiny incarnation of Yogg-Saron seemed to be right in the middle of his field of vision, but in fact, she did not exist in this hall at all. She was more like a projection that existed between reality and illusion. What's the use of you, Torim, directly using your ultimate move? Only Duque knew that Torim's actions were not only useless, but they were also more of a hindrance. With Sarah as the center of the battlefield, there were 5 green clouds from near to far, revolving around Sarah in concentric circles. At first glance, there was nothing special about these clouds. Only those with enough eyesight would realize that these were the exits of the 5 space passages. Torim, be careful. Your existence will serve as a spatial marker for those clouds. It will trigger more servants of the evil god to enter this world. According to Duque's experience in the game, without Torim's interference, these green clouds would naturally produce Yogg-Saron guardians. At first, it would take about 30 seconds for one to appear. As time passed, the interval would gradually shorten. In addition, players who stepped into the green clouds would immediately produce the next Yogg-Saron guardian. He did not know what would happen when a guardian like Torim encountered the clouds. The answer would be revealed soon. Ha! Stupid guy, you're really only fit to be my slave. Along with Sarah's loud laughter, the 5 clouds that were originally only a meter in diameter expanded more than 10 times in an instant. From each cloud, a huge figure crawled out, and within a second, the body turned from a translucent, illusory state to a solid state. They were 5 humanoid monsters that were at least 4 stories tall. They had purple skin and explosive muscles. Their bodies and lower limbs were still considered human, but their 2 arms were huge octopus tentacles, and their heads were unmistakably octopus heads. Even their chins were a few small tentacles that were constantly twisting. Duque's eyes narrowed into slits. Others might not know, but Duque knew very well that these were all commander-level monsters modeled after the Herald Woles, who guarded the ancient kingdom of Ankak. Originally, Sarah could only summon deformed monsters like the Guardians, but because of Torim's stupid teammate, he directly summoned a boss. Torim, don't touch those clouds. Also, you deal with the monsters that you created yourself. Duque yelled. Based on the principle of cleaning up one's own mess, Duque was absolutely unwilling to let the Alliance's powerhouses take action. But, before Duque's voice trailed off, something happened. Torim had even lost his hammer. His eyes were red, and he covered his temples with both hands. The veins on his neck and face were bulging, and he looked like he was in pain. No. You can't deceive me, Sif is dead. Duque's face darkened. Seeing this scene, of course, he knew that Torim was under a mental attack. Yogg-Saron began to invade Torim's mental world through illusions. A 10-story tall giant, not to mention going crazy, even a fart could shake the earth. Duque and the other little ones could only roll as far as possible to avoid being affected by Torim, who was rolling on the ground. Freya's expression turned ugly. We're in big trouble. Yogg-Saron is familiar with our mental world. If we get too close, there's a higher chance that we'll be re-brainwashed and then controlled. It'll be faster than before. On the other side, Mimirin's huge robot had already popped out 2 palms as grappling claws, grabbed Torim's shoulder, and dragged him towards the entrance of the hall. Freya summoned a cauldron the size of half a football field. Oh, it was a large well of wisdom. She tried her best to resist Yogg-Saron's mental invasion of Torim. Torim's veins had subsided quite a bit. As for his combat power, it seemed that he couldn't count on him too much. Torim. Duque wanted to curse and give the word, trash, to this deceptive guardian. In the end, he could only sigh. Torim, you're such a disgrace. Leave the group. Chapter 1629. Come to think of it, Torim was not to be blamed. Yogg-Saron was not imprisoned in Otter for a day and a half, but for 25,000 years. There was no such thing as an absolutely perfect prison in the world. No matter how tightly sealed the cage was, there would always be a time when it was damaged and revealed a gap. As the saying goes, guard day and night, it is hard to guard against a thief in the family. After Loken was controlled and completely brainwashed to become a loyal servant of Yogg-Saron, the personalities and past history of the Guardians were no longer a secret. Personality determined fate. For an evil god who was good at mind control, mastering these was equivalent to mastering the key to controlling the Guardians. Without the help of outsiders like Duke, even the four Guardians, Torim, Hodier, Freya, and Mimiron, would have been completely brainwashed after being controlled by Yogg-Saron for a year and a half. In the end, they would have been beaten to death like how they dealt with Loken. Although the four Guardians were now awake, if they could be controlled once, they could be controlled a second time. With Yogg-Saron's familiarity, the second fall would be faster and deeper. Perhaps the second time would not be a simple beating that could wake them up. Sigh. Duque let out a long sigh, and his expression immediately changed to one of awe. Let's go! Behind Duque, a slim woman in red suddenly began to transform under Sala's gaze. In the short span of 2 breaths, he had transformed from a tiny human into a massive black dragon. Before the black dragon came over, she took a deep breath. There were so many fire elements in her lungs that even through the thick scales, muscles, and bones on her chest, one could clearly see the yellow radiance blooming inside. Deep breath. Blazing flames spewed out from her mouth and nose, looking like a sea of flames. Even the bravest faceless under Yogg-Saron did not dare to take such a terrifying heat head-on. Only the 3 faceless leaders were really unjustly attacked, and most of them chose to dodge. However, even with their arms covering their heads and half squatting to eat, the 3 did not die on the spot. Their arms were charred, sticky, and even their flesh had melted together. However, they did not seem to feel pain. When the power of deep breath weakened, they tore their own flesh and rushed towards Xianxia. However, no one noticed that unknowingly, no less than 8 faceless bosses had been separated by Xianxia's big move. Black Dragon Princess was not the slightest bit afraid of the faceless leader monsters. She let out a loud roar and twisted her body. Her 10-meter-long meteor hammer-shaped tail with a terrifying spike at the end swept across. Immediately, it displayed the momentum of sweeping away 1,000 troops. At least 4 faceless ones' leaders were affected. The first one didn't suffer a direct hit, but the third one was hit by the dragon's tail. His right chest and abdomen immediately became a bloody mess. Just because the first one didn't receive a direct hit didn't mean that it was fine. It was also swept away like a bowling ball. It was only at this moment that everyone was shocked to discover that the 4 fellows who had been swept had actually separated into 4 directions and thrown themselves out of the battle circle, rolling in front of the 4 great guardians. Holy shit! Amazing! Don't even think about slacking off today. Gavin Rad smirked. At this time, everyone finally saw it. Xianxia, this seemingly fierce but actually a bit cowardly so-called guardian dragon, simply did not have the mind to fight with her life on the line. Her fighting style had always been from the heart. Well, all in all, it was cowardly. But she had thick skin and thick flesh. If she wasn't at the front, would it be Kalia holding a hammer and leading the charge? Therefore, with a big move, she directly scattered the opposite side, and then sat in a row to divide the fruits. Each guardian Audur got a leader-level faceless one. Her subtext was clearly, "Didn't you say you can't get close to Yogg-Saron? Can't you just deal with its little brothers? Come, one each, don't even think about taking a break." Freya was the first one to see through this trick. Being accused of slacking off in public was a disgrace for a guardian. The female giant's face was filled with shame and anger, but she couldn't do anything. The female giant fiercely stomped her foot, and the faceless one leader in front of her immediately trembled. The earth attribute attack of Tremor of Earth made the faceless one unable to stand steadily. "Come out, my ally!" Along with Freya's shout, 2 huge ancient trees lifted the solid bricks from the cracks in the floor tiles of the temple, stretched out their thick and powerful branches, and fiercely tied them up. Filthy creatures hiding in the depths of the earth. "Now, I will grant you the trial of light," Freya followed up with sunlight. The high temperature and heat of the resplendent sun was the most terrifying killing move for the faceless ones. A series of moves overflowing with murderous aura directly turned the Faceless One's leader into a half-cripple. The guardian of the cold winter temple, Hodier, looked cold on the outside, but his heart was fiery. He first used Freeze to send out a cold breath to lock the struggling Faceless One leader, and then used Rapid Freeze to trap half of the opponent's body in ice. Facing an opponent who stretched out his head like a mole but couldn't shrink back, he laughed and raised his huge hammer. The hammer's black hammer head was a bit like a large square wine cup, which constantly overflowed with an extremely cold breath. On the outside of the hammer head were 4 sharp ice thorns. When Hodier's ultimate skill, Freezing Bash, smashed down, a miraculous scene unfolded. The Faceless One leader's head exploded like a rotten watermelon. All the flesh and blood splashed in all directions, but before they could fall to the ground, they were completely frozen in midair. As if showing off, Hodier deliberately left the powerful Faceless One's body behind. Instead of completely destroying it, he threw it behind him. Perhaps he wanted to leave it for later to slowly watch. Torim's thunder was the most violent and the simplest. It was an extremely exaggerated thunder that blasted an area the size of a basketball court into coke. As for the Faceless One leader in the middle, what was that black thing? Think about it yourself. Among the 4 guardians, Mimiron was the most powerful. He first used his insanely ugly robot to fire a plasma cannon, killing the Faceless One leader in front of him. Almost at the same time, P3WX2 laser barrage poured out. This extremely gorgeous laser beam was not something a mortal body could resist. Under this unreasonable laser barrage, the enemies in 2 basketball courts were swept clean. The 3 Faceless One's leaders were first pierced by several extremely exaggerated laser beams. Then, the dozens of laser gun heads on the robot's arms turned, and the dense laser beams easily cut each leader's body into dozens of pieces of charred meat of different sizes. Chapter 1630. The 7 faceless leaders were killed almost at the same time. When they died, they were quite heroic, their entire bodies exploding in a very small area. Not only did flesh and blood splatter everywhere, but it also set off a strong shadow energy storm. It was a good thing that the Guardians were so powerful. However, Duque couldn't help but curse in his heart. Damn it! What the hell are you doing? Isn't this a trap? When Duke saw the mocking curve of Sarah's mouth that threatened to rise, he was angry. Yes, these faceless leaders looked very powerful, and the shadow energy fluctuations on their bodies were also amazing. If it was a 5-person elite team of professionals, it would take a lot of effort to deal with any one of them. But don't be mistaken, these guys were just cannon fodder. There were as many cannon fodder as one wanted to buy time. As long as enough time was bought, Yogg-Saron could come to the modern world in its complete form. Only a rich and overbearing veteran evil god like Yogg-Saron, who had as many underlings as dogs, could use a monster leader as cannon fodder. However, Duque was anxious and couldn't say it in advance. The Guardians were not so easy to fool. Duque could previously say that when he peeped into the river of time, he also peeped into the future, but he was not Nosdormu, and there was no taboo that he couldn't spoil. If Duque spoiled it, it would be hard to explain later. It was fine now that everyone was united. After the fight was over, they would not settle accounts, but it would not be good to have a grudge between Duque and the Guardians. Originally, after Sarah showed her hand, Duque would immediately analyze it. Who knew that the Guardians would be so fierce that they directly killed 7? Awesome. Unfortunately, it was too awesome. Seeing that Sarah didn't say a word and directly summoned 8 faceless leaders in the green cloud, almost everyone, including the 4 Guardians, froze for a moment. Only Duque was clear-headed. He slammed Aish, and the Guardian's divine artifact staff suddenly swayed on the ground with a circle of blue ripples. Duque shouted, "Don't make a mistake. Your enemy is not Yogg-Saron's minions, but its incarnation. Those guys have a lot of space beacons on them, let them die next to Sarah. Explode his mother. We can't let Yogg-Saron come out in a complete state." You're very good. Sala, who had her secret exposed, was naturally furious. Her long hair began to flutter even though there was no wind. Her dark brown hair formed a terrifying mouth full of fangs in the air, as if it was about to swallow someone whole. Sarah waved her arms, and a mass of pitch-black shadow energy was thrown out. Shadow energy gave the impression of coldness. However, the energy that Sarah threw out was mixed with a sense of blazing anger. The constantly tumbling black energy was thrown into the air, directly divided into 9, and shot toward the 9 faceless leaders like electric bolts. At a speed visible to the naked eye, the bodies of the 9 leaders, which were already not small in size to begin with, became bigger on the spot. Their height had increased by 1 meter, but the greatest increase was still in their tentacle arms. If they were octopus-like tentacles before, they were now like the arms of a qilin. From a whip to a hammer, the increase in physical attack power was simply terrifying. Several paladins who were originally going to be the MT jumped in fright. Seeing the qilin arms smashing down, the paladins all hurriedly dodged. Only Magni was the most miserable. After using Avatar to become bigger, his agility also decreased greatly. He couldn't dodge at all. He used his shield to block the punch, and his arm almost broke. What the hell? Shorty King cursed. The enemy's attacks suddenly increased. Duque naturally knew what was going on. This was a wrath of Sala, directly giving his own people chicken blood. Although the side effect was quite big, it didn't matter if they were cannon fodder. Fortunately, Wrath of Sala didn't increase the life force of the faceless leaders. However, this was also very troublesome. Right now, Duque really wanted Magni to level up, because among the group of demigods in the Alliance, there wasn't a single F*King melee fighter. It wasn't that he couldn't let Sword Emperor in, but now wasn't the time, and Sword Emperor wasn't in him. Duque's face darkened, and he shouted, "Hodia! Cooperate with me!" Duque, who rolled up his sleeves and entered the arena, was naturally very strong. Originally, it was very difficult for Duque to link with Winter Guardian Hodier just by using Azeroth's ice elemental magic. Don't forget that a while ago, the Big Mouse Duque had been entrusted by Alexstrasza to help Calegos preserve the magic titan runes that originally belonged to Maligos. In an instant, the ice titan runes that represented the most primitive of the world began to dance around the two guardians, Duque and Hodier. The titan energy that represented the most primitive of the world's laws only lasted for a tenth of a second before it surged. Even though it wasn't specifically targeted at the Alliance powerhouses, the absolute zero level of freezing air that spread throughout the hall was still a little unbearable for the Alliance powerhouses. "Come closer to me," the former elf prince Kale, that shouted, and then he released 5 spinning golden flames around him. The seemingly small flames kept circling 10 meters away from Kale, drawing out a heart-like area that was enough to resist the cold outside. Onyxia also knew that Duque was taking care of the Alliance powerhouses. Her dragon eyes blinked, and in the end, her whole dragon lay down, blocking the shock wave of the cold for the mortals. "Ha!" Duque shouted and suddenly stretched out his right hand. Absolute zero freeze break. An illusory iceberg suddenly appeared in the east, south, west, and north directions. The 4 icebergs collapsed at the same time, setting off a terrifying wave of ice that reached the top of the temple. It was an iceberg formed by the convergence of countless ice elements. It was crushed into powder, instantly frozen, exploded again, and frozen again. This ultimate move that combined physical and elemental double damage suddenly forced the remaining faceless leaders into a dead end. There was no room for resistance. Under the surging impact of the ice wave, they directly collided with each other and were all forced to Sala's side in a messy posture. Sala didn't exist in the present world of Azeroth. The ice wave easily passed through her body and couldn't cause any harm to her. However, the 9 faceless leaders piled up around her, looking extremely strange. What made her even more ashen was that Duque had obviously found her Achilles' heel. Right? As long as these guys died beside Sala, when they self-destructed, Sala's avatar would also be destroyed, and then Yogg-Saron would be forced out in advance. Smash him to death. My hammer, Torim's hand flashed with lightning as he once again hoarded the power of lightning on his warhammer. Not only him, but the other guardians, Queen Sylvanas, Vashch, and other powerhouses also exerted their strength. No, seeing that things were not going well, Sala let out a mournful scream. Chapter 1631. In fact, the faceless leader also has the ability to make people mentally retarded. However, if they were to be brainwashed so early on, then when Yogg-Saron's main body came out, there would be no need to fight anymore. Under the powerful pressure of the ancient god, they would just leave the group to preserve their intelligence. Duque made his move in advance because he considered this point. He directly used the ice wave to gather the leader of the faceless ones. In terms of attack output, Duque had never been inferior to anyone, but those 4 silly guardians could not get close, which was a bit of a pain in the ass. Duque did not want a group of onlookers who only knew how to shout 666. Therefore, the damage output was left to Torim and the others. Save your energy, Duque instructed in his own magic circuit. Within a unit area, there was a limit to the number of elements that could be sent from the elemental realm. If the elemental channel was expanded without a limit, it would cause the space in the current world to become unstable. The power of lightning had high attack power, and its instantaneous damage was far above that of fire elemental magic. Unfortunately, even an idiot would know that fire magic was famous for consuming large amounts of mana. Naturally, lightning magic, which had explosive power, was even more ridiculous. 3 hours of charging, 3 seconds of acting tough. Fortunately, Torim and the rest did not simply use the elements of the elemental world. They used the power that was converted from the Titan series energy of the arcane element. In addition, this was considered half their home field, so the elemental imbalance in the hall was not caused. The scene was still very magnificent. Torim's lightning, Freya's sunlight, Hodier's ice, and Mimirin's laser. The 4 colors of light mixed together and formed a terrifying destructive energy ball. If he were to unleash these ultimate moves elsewhere, there would probably be a mushroom cloud on the spot. Then, passers-by would drink their tea and say, "Today is another day of nuclear annihilation." However, the scene became strange. Not to mention the stones flying in all directions. There was no explosion. There was no sound. There wasn't even any light. A black hole invisible to the naked eye seemed to have appeared where Sala was, absorbing all the destructive energy. Every expert could clearly see Sala's twisted face. At the same time, her limbs were twisting unnaturally. A pair of thick and bulging muscles on her bare arms were twisted into a twisted dough twist. It was a shocking sight. It wasn't an action that a normal human or Vrykul could do. However, Sala's eyes spewed out crimson flames, which then turned into balls of thick liquid. In the next second, the so-called slurry turned into some kind of seemingly holy energy. Suddenly, a pair of bright wings burst through the leather clothes on Sala's back and spread out with a whoosh. Sarah had become the battle angel Vrykul. Duque had seen this scene countless times in the game. He didn't think there was any problem before, but now that he was in the world of Azeroth, Duque couldn't help but wonder, damn it, what does the Vrykul have to do with Yogg-Saron? Perhaps the incarnation of Yogg-Saron had already begun to sneak out of odor 10,000 years ago and spread the seeds of nightmares everywhere. Thinking about the ancient war 10,000 years ago, it was also a group of a few ancient gods who should have been suppressed who caused trouble. Enzos was involved, but Yogg-Saron might have also used mind control or inducement to secretly add fuel to the fire. That was why the High Elves courted death. After thinking about this, Duque didn't find it strange at all. The translucent battle angel hovered above the hall. The Guardians only needed a glance to know that this incarnation had yet to enter the world of Azeroth. She was still an illusory projection. As the battle angel Vrykul waved her arms, the floor in the center of the hall finally reacted. Disperse! There was no need for Duque to shout. Seeing this, the experienced Alliance heroes had already dispersed in advance. Suddenly, all the experts felt an inexplicable fear in their hearts. No one could look away. Everyone's line of sight had been firmly locked by the rapidly distorting space in front of them. The air in the hall was completely still. Whether it was the dust from the battle just now or the smell of blood that should have spread, everything was locked in place. A terrifying radiance surged out from the ground below the battle angel Vrykul hovering in midair. The existence known as evil was gushing out from there. It was silent, quiet, and terrifying. All the living beings in the hall, whether they were non-living beings or not, seemed to have received the greatest degree of shock and were silent. Everything seemed to kneel down respectfully because of the horror of the one who was about to come out. A ball of constantly changing radiance from blue to green, and then back to blue, actually strongly repelling any power that belonged to the Titans. In the hall, the pillars engraved with Titan runes were dim. These pillars were once equivalent to the chains on the ancient god Yogg-Saron's cage. Now, there was no longer a trace of energy fluctuation on them. Sala, who had transformed into the battle angel, suddenly opened her eyes. There was chaos in her pupils. Suddenly, Sarah began to laugh maniacally. Ha! Wah! Accompanied by the ear-piercing and rough sound, all the experts felt that the laws of this place were deviating. The power of order was leaving them in fear, and the irregular energy of chaos was gushing out. It was like a power that mortals could never resist. It was eroding the entire space, as if it wanted to swallow this hall, this order, and even the entire world into its mouth. Kalala! The mortal heroes subconsciously lowered their heads and found that the gorgeous tiles under their feet had silently cracked with Sala as the center. The floor tiles that were originally part of the cage started to spin strangely, as if they were trembling in fear. They swayed and floated up into the air. In the next moment, the air in the entire hall was filled with an evil that everyone was familiar with. Then, everyone felt that they were being stared at by countless eyes. Slowly, their gazes were filled with greed, tyranny, anger, cruelty, and other negative things. This was not an illusion. Those deformed eyeballs that gradually turned from illusory to real in midair were indeed staring at everyone. And they were also staring at Duque. Whether it was Duque or the Guardians, no matter who it was, being stared at by hundreds and thousands of eyeballs was a normal reaction. All the experts felt a chill in their hearts. Immediately, a huge existence began to turn from illusory to real in the center of the hall. A loud voice echoed in the hall and even in order. It was the angry roar of the ancient god, the angry roar of the thousand-throated demon. I am a lucid dream. The monster in your nightmares. The demon with 1,000 faces. Foolish mortals and guardians, tremble in my true form. Surrender before the god of death. Chapter 1632. As a mutant superboss, Yogg-Saron was very ugly. Affecting the city's appearance and scaring children was used to describe a guy like it. In other words, all the ancient evil gods were guys who let down the audience. Previously in the game, Duque felt that Thun, Yogg-Saron, and so on were all very ugly. Now that he had encountered it in real life, he realized that Daddy Blizzard's artists had really used Photoshop. The beauty camera and a series of evil spells did not completely show Yogg-Saron's ugliness. Its ugliness was comparable to the Cthulhu evil god. The first impression that Yogg-Saron gave Duque was that it had a big mouth. A super big mouth that was 1,000,000 times more ferocious than a piranha. If it was a human, then its mouth would definitely be the kind that split to the back of the head. The incomparably huge mouth was full of crisscrossing fangs and thin teeth. The longest tooth was 3 stories high, and it would take at least 2 people to wrap their arms around the root of the tooth. Above the big mouth was a toad-like skull. 5 senses. Okay, this thing was not just 5 senses, it should be 1,000 senses. The top of the skull was densely packed with eyes that seemed to be randomly distributed. In fact, they were not eyes. They were small mouths full of fangs. The reason why it seemed to be an illusion of eyes was purely because everyone saw the evil light emitting from the 1,000 throats. When everyone saw it clearly, the ladies were the first to break down. Korea, Gianna, Thusia, and the other queens all looked like they were about to vomit. Even though Duque had secretly prepared them in advance, even though they had all seen Thun's face before, they were still quite disgusted. If they were swallowed by that horrifying big mouth, there would be no bones left. If they were bitten by that small mouth, they would probably not be spared. This kind of horror at such close proximity was not something that could be endured by those who had great courage. Fortunately, one look at its translucent head and they knew that it was unknown whether the Titan's cage was still in effect or for some other reason, but Yogg-Saron did not seem to have truly descended into the modern world. "Be careful!" Tarim suddenly shouted. A huge tentacle appeared. Rather than saying that it broke through the ground, it was more accurate to say that it broke through space. Even though Duque had given the order early in the morning, because the enemy's situation was unclear, the Alliance's heroes were spread out to avoid being wiped out all at once. However, this tentacle still managed to trap a certain someone. "Help, the tail is going to break." It broke. Yes, it was his hoof that got hit. As soon as the gigantic tentacle appeared, it curled towards the hoof. However, Imriel's reaction was not slow. He raised his shield and sidestepped the attack. Who knew that even though she was fast, the tentacles would react even faster. As soon as they rushed forward, they whipped back. They couldn't hit the hoof's legs, but they managed to pull the hoof's tail. He was then pulled into the air like a flag being waved by a flag bearer, swaying back and forth in the air. Holy shield! It's not working! The hoof tried to activate his invincibility, but it was unknown whether he was distracted or brainwashed, but he failed to activate his invincibility. Duque bared his teeth and looked at the hoof that was being swung around. Although he wanted to say that the magical girl and tentacles were a perfect match, and the magic hoof was not bad either, Duque still shouted, "Corellon!" At first, Duque did not intend to let the 4 guardians of Alcafon's treasury attack. Although the hall on the Stairway of Madness was not small, the space was still limited. If 8 10-story tall giants were all squeezed together, the Alliance's heroes would not even need to fight. Just avoiding them would be difficult. Compared to Alcafon and the others, Tarim and the other guardians of the same size were stronger. However, Tarim and the others' brainwaves had all been successfully decrypted, and rushing forward would be suicide. With no other choice, Duque still used Alcafon and the others as meat shields for the time being. As soon as Flame Guardian Corellon heard Duque's call, he smashed over with a bursting fireball, directly turning this 3-story tall, writhing tentacle into a torch. Storm Guardian Amullon was the second to arrive. Being in charge of the wind element, he had speed that the other giant guardians did not have. Watching a 10-story giant turn into a gust of wind and rush over in an instant, using his palm as a knife to chop off the tentacle with one hand, the shock was indescribable. The hoof was saved. She covered her tail with tears in the corner of her eyes. It was said that a kitten hanging upside down with its tail would easily poop. He did not know if Delaney's hoof would have this reaction when her tail was pulled too hard. Duque did not have time to care about this, because Yogg-Saron's vicious move was coming again. Dozens of giant tentacles rose from the illusion. They did not actively attack any of the Alliance's powerhouses, but their auxiliary attacks were more disgusting than direct attacks. Black Plague. The plague came to its victims without a sound or warning. Take Gavin Rad for example. Right now, this guy felt that he was better off dead than alive. His entire life was gloomy. That terrible feeling was like being infected with syphilis or AIDS, plus his penis was rotting and shortening by 1 centimeter every day. What was even more disgusting was that his whole body was emitting a glow like that of a dog, causing the people around him to stay away from him. "I need treatment," Gavin Rad said bitterly. Normal dispelling spells could not save him. Only someone at the level of a bishop could help him. Gavin Rad, don't move. Kalia was rarely domineering. She cast holy light magic. In the air in front of her, a perspective image of Gavin Rad's body appeared. It looked more like an X-ray picture, but it was more detailed. If Duque saw this, he would definitely shout for an ultrasound. Unfortunately, Duque did not have time, because he was retarded. When a blue hat was placed on Duque's head, Duque knew that something was wrong. Brain connection. This is a trick of Yogg-Saron, who is good at mind control. This trick can connect the brains of 2 people who are far away and last for 30 seconds. When the 2 people are more than 20 yards away from each other, both of them will continuously lose life and consciousness. Approaching each other can prevent this effect. However, no one had ever told Duque that connecting to the brain could allow him to peek at the other person's thoughts. In less than half a second, Duque suddenly realized that he could sense the hoof's thoughts. It's over. It's over. I've actually connected to Duke Marcus's brain. Will he punish me? Spank me? Won't let go of my tail? Sob, I keep feeling like he has ulterior motives toward my tail. Duque really wanted to bang his head against the wall and die. Damn, what's wrong with this hoof's brain? Duque's own thoughts were not too worried about being peeped at, because long before he entered the stairway of madness, Duque had already asked the system elf to open the shallow layer of the mental world's defense system. Even if they peeped, they would only be able to see what Duque had set up beforehand. What was playing in his first layer of mental defense? It seemed to be brainless sheep and gray lady. Chapter 1633. Beautiful, happy, Imriel was on the verge of breaking down. She could clearly sense Duque's thoughts. Although the thoughts in Duque's mind were a mess, she was sure that it was Duque's. She was confused and did not know what to do. Her brain was hurting. She did not know if she was losing her moral integrity or her intelligence. Perhaps it was both. She stared blankly at Duque, who was 30 meters away. Duque's mouth was wide open as if he was shouting something at her. She subconsciously smiled at Duque, a silly smile. Seeing the hoof's typical silly smile, Duque clenched his teeth and rolled his eyes. He did not know where to start. A piercing pain in his soul made Duque suck in a breath of cold air. He noticed that this was a very rare form of injury. First of all, his mind thought that he was injured. Then, there seemed to be a wound on his arm out of nowhere, and dark red blood spurted out just like that. Pissed. How long had it been since he was injured? Even his demigod body was not immune to this strange injury. Duque had no choice but to flash in front of the hoof. At first, Duque thought that the distance was enough to negate the effect of brain connection. Who knew it was still not enough? *CK. How close did it have to be? The injury happened every second. Duque did not want to go through that again. After all, it was not just an injury, but also a loss of mind. Duque did not know if a person with a high IQ or a strong will could last longer. He did not want to gamble. He grabbed the horn on the hoof's right head and pressed his forehead against the hoof's forehead. Buzz. This was not a normal sound. It was more like a voice of the soul. It shocked Duque and Imriel. Duque could clearly feel that part of his memory that did not belong to the mental barrier had been sent to the hoof during the spiritual collision. A portion of the hoof's memories also intruded into Duque's spirit sea. Duque quickly glanced at it. It was a memory fragment of hoof finding joy in the midst of suffering under the protection of the Drenii. Unfortunately, he didn't have the time to look at it in detail. He had the system elf seal it up temporarily. Duque immediately shouted, warning the others, "Be careful." Yogg-Saron would release a brainwave that would connect the two victims. If the two of them were too far away from each other, they would lose consciousness and life force at the same time. Once their consciousness falls beyond the limit, they will be controlled by the Yogg-Saron. Nothing is more convincing than the victim's story. Duque, who had personally experienced its effects, was able to name the skills in the game. It was more like an ability that surpassed the imagination of ordinary people. At this moment, the scene was very chaotic. The corrosive tentacles that drilled out from the ground frantically poured out messy things in all directions. There was the Doomsday Curse that would cause serious shadow damage. There was the Cold Heart that would greatly reduce a person's movement and attack speed. There was also the Battle Angel Sala, who was guiding 4 terrifying laser beams to randomly shoot at the crowd. However, the laser beams did not move very fast. As long as one was not entangled by the tentacles, there was a high chance of escaping. No one wanted to try the laser beams that could kill someone instantly. It was in this chaotic scene that Duque did not notice the strange blush on Imriel's face after she absorbed part of his memory. Duque did not know what went wrong. The Yogg-Saron at this time was obviously more powerful than he thought. In addition to the huge number of tentacles, Sala, who was hovering in the air, in the middle of the spatial crack, could actually continue to summon the faceless leader. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. These huge deformed monsters with ugly tentacles as arms pounced on the four guardians almost as soon as they came out of the green mist. Although they were not as tall as Alcaphon, they were not much weaker in terms of strength. What was more difficult to deal with was their mind control special skill. If one saw these huge fellows suddenly stop moving and stare at an alliance expert, then the people nearby would have to be careful. This was a standard shadow spell, and people with low shadow resistance were often more susceptible to it. For example, Vanessa, she was hit and almost chopped off Gavin Rad's little penis. However, Gavin Rad was very skilled. Before Vanessa could make a move, he first gave the female thief a sanction, using the power of the holy light to knock her out and restore her consciousness. However, Vanessa was the only one who knew how much her sanity had dropped under the mind control. Those who were hit were everywhere, and the scene became more and more chaotic. Those who were hit, come over here. Duque shouted. This was because the guardian of life, Freya, had opened another well of wisdom. This was the only way to eliminate the negative effects of monkey-style reduce intelligence. Duque, this can't go on. There's no end to those octopuses. Magni shouted. He was using the Balrog's hammer to teach a thick tentacle that was swaying left and right. The blazing flames ignited the entire tentacle, and it gave off a smell similar to roasted squid, but 100 times more burnt. Everyone realized that there were too many tentacles and too many faceless leaders. Whether it was Sala or Yogg-Saron's projection, they were all illusory existences caught in the cracks of space and could not be touched at all. When the hammer fell, it was as if it was hitting the air, and Yogg-Saron was unharmed. We have to do something. Tyrion also shouted. Ashbringer was powerful, and a full force slash could cut off several tentacles. However, within a few seconds, the same number of tentacles would replace it. This gave people a feeling of despair, as if all their attacks were useless. Just wait. There will be a chance. Yogg-Saron can't endlessly send tentacles through the cracks in space without revealing a flaw. Duque said with absolute certainty. In fact, even if Duque was not a transmigrator, with his current eyesight, he could see that Yogg-Saron's flaw was gradually getting bigger. From a spatial point of view, Yogg-Saron's current method was indeed very cunning. Every spatial passage could not be one way. There must be an entrance. What Yogg-Saron needed to do now was to immediately destroy the small space channel after sending his biological tissues or subordinates of Faceless One. This method could make it impossible for the enemy to bite back at its main body. There were pros and cons. In a short period of time, the effect was significant. The Allied forces could not fight back and could only blindly use elemental energy. However, whether Yogg-Saron noticed or not, the surrounding space was already a little unstable. Chapter 1634. The instability of the space did not mean that Otter's space was about to collapse. As a powerful cage used to imprison an ancient god, the toughness of the space here was beyond Duque's imagination. Here, even if Duque had a tiche, he would not be able to open half a portal. The difficulty was so high that it was like giving Duque an iron spoon and asking him to dig through a 1,000-meter-thick steel plate. In addition to the sturdy space, there were also various ceiling systems for divine senses and thoughts. Even though this place was riddled with holes because of Yogg-Saron, it was not difficult to see how sturdy the defense here was 25,000 years ago. If it were Duque, he would have given up on healing and become a prisoner obediently, letting all his spirit be worn away. Duque found it hard to imagine how Yogg-Saron could dig a secret passage under such circumstances, transmit its will, and then secretly corrode the King of Wisdom, Loken. In fact, even though Yogg-Saron had taken care of almost all the Guardians here, it still could not come out easily. According to the latest detection data from the system ELF, Yogg-Saron had already come out. However, in order to avoid direct attacks on its body, which was still in a weakened state, it should be hiding in the spatial crevice between the cage and the real world to catch its breath. There was no need for Duke to do so. Mimiron saw through this first, and he immediately shouted, "Damn it! Yogg-Saron is stalling for time." The more time it fought for, the more its strength would recover as time went by. "We must break this spatial wall as soon as possible and attack its body." "How do we break it?" "How?" Torim, who had the most irritable temper, retorted. Mimiron was an inventor and half a scientist, but it was the first time he had encountered such a strange situation. Now, the spiritual energy that leaked out from the spatial crevice should be Yogg-Saron's weakness. How could they make use of these spiritual energy balls? It was Duque who told the truth. "I know. These spiritual energy balls are the intersection between the spatial crevice and the real world, the spatial nodes. We only need to remove the concealment to find the coordinates of the spatial rift where Yogg-Saron is located." After saying that, Duque used his drumstick, Atish, as a spear and brandished it. There was an element of coolness in this, but more importantly, when Duke waved Atish, he made the artifact staff come into contact with the surrounding space, creating a better connection effect. Slamming the bottom of the staff onto the cracked floor, Duque shouted, "Remove it!" Falsehood. The arcane circuits in his body rotated at high speed, and the surging arcane energy poured into the staff through the circuit ports on his arm. It was a spell that was the complete opposite of a mage's mirror clone. Duque tried to get rid of the false mirror image that shrouded the energy clumps. Unfortunately, it didn't work. Wow! The difference in energy levels between a demigod and a true god was so exaggerated that it was like a natural chasm. It almost shocked Duque to death. Duque spat out a mouthful of blood. F***CK. What a loss. Duque could clearly feel the backlash of the magic impact on his magic circuit. "Duque!" Kalia exclaimed and directly gave Duque a greater healing. Jaina even flashed over, trying to help Duque with her circuit and restore peace to Duque's magic circuit. "No. It's okay." Duque gently pushed Jaina away. When it came to magic, Duque was second to none in the coalition army. He couldn't do it, and the others couldn't do it either. Duque immediately changed his mind. "Damn it, if you don't dispel it, then I'll add something to it, okay?" Something that made Sala seethe with anger happened. Duque directly used True Mirror to create a few fake portals on top of the spiritual energy balls of Yogg-Saron. Duque pointed at the several illusory portals. "Charge. 1 door for each person. Touch the door and you can connect your mind to it. That's Yogg-Saron's dream. Only by destroying the nightmarish creatures in the dream can you break through the fog of spiritual energy and reveal the spatial coordinates. Finally, drag Yogg-Saron out of the spatial rift and kill him." Originally, Duque should have taken the lead and led the way to break through the spiritual energy balls that would mutate into dreams. Duque hesitated. In this life, because of his many good deeds, many key major events had already gone awry. In the original history, Yogg-Saron would give out 3 dreams, which corresponded to 3 major historical events in Azeroth: Storm Fortress Dream, Grandmaster Assassin Garona. She was once Ghoul Dan's assistant. Later, she was sent to Karazhan and had a passionate time with Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras. Later, she was deeply trusted by King Lang and became the most important orc advisor to the king and Anduin Lothar. Unexpectedly, under Ghoul Dan's control, she eventually betrayed King Lang and assassinated King Lang in front of the young Varian. This also led to the collapse of Stormwind in the first battle of the Dark Portal in history. Obsidian's Sanctum Dream. When forging the Dragon Soul, the fallen Deathwing deceived the other brothers and forged the Demon Soul, and then almost wiped out Malago's Blue Dragon Legion. Frozen Crown Dream. Betrayed by the alchemists in the Gates of Heaven's Wrath, Bolvar was poisoned and burned by the Red Dragon's flames. His soul was resurrected by Arthas. Arthas tortured Bolvar while trying to convert him. These dreams given by Yogg-Saron actually had a strong psychological effect. The 3 dreams seemed to be unrelated, but in fact, they all had the same core idea: betrayal. Garona betrayed Lang and Anduin's trust and killed Lang. Nethario betrayed his brothers and sisters and became famous as the Deathwing. There was also Bolvar. This was the future version of betrayal. At that time, It also hinted that Bolvar would betray the alliance and become a powerful Death Knight. The problem was, if Yogg-Saron gave these 3 dreams again in this life, Duque would not believe any of them except for the second one. Because Garona did not succeed in assassinating Lang, Lang lived until the end of World War II. Then, Duque stirred up trouble and directly prevented the Gates of Heaven's Wrath incident from happening. Therefore, if there were still 3 dreams, Duque had no idea what the other 2 dreams would be. The unknown sometimes represented fear. Duque had never been a particularly determined person. He wasn't in the past, and he was average now. He probably wouldn't be strong in the future. If it weren't for the moral integrity of the saints to protect Duque, Duque would have long since joined the Scourge Legion or the Burning Legion. Just as Duque stood still, his companions and the harem all thought that Duque was going to stay so that he could open the portal as soon as the dream was broken. Chapter 1635. Am I so scared? Duque looked at his empty right hand. When he didn't use Song of Light and Shadow, Duque always left his right hand empty. Ever since he arrived in Azeroth more than 20 years ago, that hand hadn't changed much. Maybe it was just a little bit bigger. He went from an ignorant wizard apprentice to a demigod step by step. His experience was enough to write a novel of more than 3 million words. At this moment, fierce battles were still going on around him, but in Duque's vision, everything was still hazy no matter how he looked around. There were only moving shadows. Duque knew that it was an illusion, but he couldn't help but call out, Aurelia! Aurelia was the most special person for Duque. This sexy, elegant, and noble elf was an epic of Azeroth. For some reason, Duque felt lost. He called out Aurelia's name, hoping to see the elf stay by his side as usual. But the surroundings were still hazy. The people around him all had lively faces and rich expressions, but in Duque's mind, their faces were all marked as blank. Windlesha? Duke stretched out his right hand in vain to grab it, but he caught nothing. The beautiful figure of the female elf in front of him was just an illusion. In his vision, the scenery changed. Duque suddenly found himself in the infinite void of space. The planet Azeroth below him was equally hazy and moving away at a high speed. Then, he felt that his body was being pulled into a 1,000-meter-long rope. Was he being dragged into a black hole? Or was he teleported? He was constantly being dragged into the deepest part of the universe, and he felt like he was falling. The illusion of weightlessness caused Duke to feel panic that he had not felt in a long time. This feeling made him feel like he was suffocating, and even the last drop of air in his lungs was being squeezed out of his throat. Duque woke up abruptly. He opened his eyes and saw his right hand reaching out randomly. His angry palm was still in a groping position. Obviously, it was destined to touch nothing. Duque could clearly feel Sala's gaze. Yogg-Saron was already staring at him. Perhaps, as the commander of the Alliance and the leader of the Allied forces, he was the favorite prey of the ancient gods. A chill came over him. It was as if he had been tied up and placed in front of 1,000 mouths full of fangs. He had an ominous premonition that he would be thrown into the mouths at any time and die without a burial. For a moment, Duque thought of giving up. I don't have to enter those dreams. It's more beneficial for the Alliance army if I'm overseeing the situation from the outside. Even if I don't do anything now, this powerful team will still win. Duque's own voice resounded in his spirit sea one after another. There were piles and piles of high-sounding excuses. Duque almost convinced himself. At this moment, Duque saw a beautiful and valiant female figure leading the charge. They were neatly arranged, pointing to the sky and the vast universe. A series of chocobo claws scratched the ground behind her. Sylvanas suddenly turned back, and her aged silhouette was reflected in the shiny armor of the arcane puppet beside her. So I'm already very old. Yes, 5,000 years had passed since the Sun King Anastrian had betrayed the elves. When the elves returned to a peaceful life, their worship of magic rose once more. The representatives were the wizards, led by Kale, who had raised their heads once more. Your Majesty, Kale, has raised the flag of rebellion. He and the new Silvery Moon Council have rebelled. Hadgeron Brightwing, who had hurried over, was also old and clumsy. The half of his body that had been burned by the fire was a ghastly sight. Chapter 1636. Impossible. He's older than me. How could he? No. He's defected to the Calamity Army. Death has given him eternal life. He's even more powerful than he was at his peak. In the magic mirror that Hadgeron opened was Kale. His face was bloodless, and there were only 2 balls of blue soul fire in his eye sockets. With a wave of his hand, he killed hundreds and thousands of elven rangers in a sea of fire. No, it shouldn't be like this. 5,000 years of hard work had been destroyed in an instant. The feeling of his lifetime's hard work being destroyed in a moment pressed down on him like an avalanche, causing Sylvanas to be unable to catch his breath. She still held the Solidar Stars of Fury, and she still had a large group of subordinates under her. But the old age of her body had eroded her courage and corroded her heart. A voice kept echoing in her ears. It was a voice that she would always remember. The owner of the voice was called an Astrian Sunstrider. She had snatched this kingdom from the hands of the Sunstrider royal family, who had betrayed the High Elves. Do you feel it? Sylvanas, do you feel how I felt back then? All my hard work has gone down the drain. All my future has been forcibly taken away. There's nothing left except this feeling of old age and powerlessness. A sense of weakness came. It was as if all the blood in her body had been sucked out. Sylvanas felt as if she had done this hundreds of millions of times, to the point where she was already so familiar with drawing a bow that she couldn't even do it anymore. That kind of trembling feeling of age was quickly corroding her heart. No, this isn't me. It's not me. Sylvanas realized that she was about to cry. That feeling of powerlessness was the most terrifying torture for someone like her, who was always determined to forge ahead. She could face the most terrifying enemy without fear, but she could not face her old self. She could ignore her old appearance, but she could not face herself who could not even draw a bow. It trembled. An Astrian's voice was magnetic and hallucinatory. Do you understand how I feel? Betrayal is not because of self-interest. I did it to better lead the elves, for the elves to have a better future. At this moment, Sylvanas was at a complete loss. At the same time, in different dreams, every intruder was being interrogated by their conscience, justice, and beliefs. In the dream of the Obsidian Temple, Xianxia had returned to the past, and she had become an unremarkable young dragon. Her father was right in front of her, tearing her mother into pieces. Then, a fingertip of a huge claw pressed fiercely against Xianxia's back, forcing her to raise her neck and look up at the horrifying scene that was so huge that it occupied her entire field of vision. The huge dragon's nose continuously breathed out flames. The acid that had accumulated on the chest of the wings of death dripped down the gaps of the metal armor, converging into a small stream, and was approaching the young and helpless girl step by step. Shivering, she could only lower her head and listen to her father's lecture. It was a voice that shocked the entire sanctum and even the entire world. Idiot! This was not betrayal. This is just us black dragons breaking free from the cage those filthy titans gave us. Guardian dragons? Bullshit. This damned responsibility has shackled our freedom. Whatever we want to do, we must first obtain the permission of responsibility. This is not some guardian dragon at all. We are just slaves that the Titans use to watch the door. The Yogg-Saron gods are the original masters of this world. They were the greatest of the native gods. The Titans and whatnot, they are just a bunch of despicable intruders. Look at you, Xianxia. You are a disgrace to us, the great black dragons. There is nothing to be ashamed of being the servant of the greatest ancient god, but to become the mount of insignificant humans? Has your pride been eaten by slime? 3,000 years ago, those humans were just jungle monkeys wearing animal skins. Xianxia only felt that her body seemed to become smaller and smaller, while in her eyes, her father's body grew larger and larger. He used his black wings to cover the entire sky. On the other side, Vashj was dreaming of 10,000 years ago, the time when she was the maid of Queen Azhara. Vash, do you know your sins? It was a voice that sounded like thunder. The perfect queen, with a perfect face, had spoken words that represented judgment. Almost subconsciously, Vashj wanted to kneel down. And in the palace of Lordaeron, Tyrion saw the past as a bystander, watching how Tyrenas treated Arthas coldly. There was no kinship, no forgiveness. There was only one seemingly unattainable goal after another. No matter how hard one worked, there was no reward for completing the goal, because it was natural. If one did not achieve the goal, there would only be angry punishment. All that was on the tip of his tongue was responsibility. A kind heart, in fact, had already gradually become twisted. In different dreamlands, each challenger had a different experience. As for Duque, as soon as he stepped into the dream, he knew that Yogg-Saron had put in a lot of effort this time. Because he suddenly saw himself in an internet cafe. Every night, in the deepest part of his mind, he would always recall that memory. More than 10 acquaintances and brothers and sisters from all over the country, forming a 40-man party. In the voice chat group, they shouted at the top of their lungs, giving commands, screaming in pain when the party was wiped out, and the ecstasy of finally defeating the boss after so many hardships. He still remembered the first time they formed a party to fight the Molten Core. They actually died in front of the 2 Molten Core giants at the entrance for the whole night. He still remembered the first time they fought the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. They were stuck for 2 whole weeks. Almost every night was 8 hours of high-intensity exploration. The moment the boss fell, the whole internet cafe boiled, as if the cold tap water had instantly boiled to 100 degrees. Ha! Past! Finally killed this boss. Duque shouted wildly, raising his hands high. But in the midst of joy, he suddenly had a question. Where's my Aurelia? Where's my harem? Did you become stupid from playing games? Guang laughed and scolded. We're playing games? Duque's smile suddenly turned bitter, because he saw that in his retina, the label for Guang was clearly, Yogg-Saron's tentacle. Duque suddenly sighed. No wonder Yogg-Saron is the evil god that's best at currying favor. If it weren't for the system elf, I would probably really think that what happened to me in Azeroth was a long-ago dream. When I really believed that it was a dream, I would naturally betray all of Azeroth. Unfortunately, I can't go back. I, Duque, am already a demigod in Azeroth. With a slightly gloomy smile, Duque snapped his fingers. Almost instantly, all the friends sitting next to Duque in the internet cafe were lit up like human torches. Chapter 1637. Among his former friends, there were his roommates, classmates from the same class and the class next door, as well as people who often came to the internet cafe and were familiar with each other. They watched as the illusions in their appearances were burned. Duque only had one feeling. That's heart-wrenching, buddy. Duque was so upset that he was about to cry. However, this was a mental attack. It was a mental attack where only one of them could become the victor. Usually, it was difficult for any intelligent creature with a normal mind to control their mind. There were only 2 ways to control a creature with high intelligence and combat power in the shortest amount of time with the simplest violence: severely injure its mind and wear down its intelligence. The mind-weakening spell was easy to understand. It would be considered a success if a person with an average IQ of 90 dropped to an IQ of 5. Whether it was by slowing down their thinking or weakening their thinking. However, such a method would often reduce the creature's combat ability. Without the ability to think, humans were no different from mentally retarded zombies. Yogg-Saron chose another, more troublesome method, severely injuring the mind. This wasn't untraceable. Before Duque entered Order, he carefully recalled Yogg-Saron's methods. He came to the conclusion that Yogg-Saron was a super expert at dissociative amnesia. Dissociative amnesia was a memory disorder characterized by sudden memory regression. The disease was caused by great pressure or trauma, such as witnessing the death of a loved one. The patient forgot the painful experience, as if the memory had never happened, living in a self-deceiving lie. Take Torim for example. In the battle with Loken in history, Torim carried great hatred and heavy responsibilities, but he was brainwashed into a slave by Yogg-Saron the moment he turned around. This was what he relied on. The mental world was the most complicated thing. If it was completely brainwashed, one would become an idiot. Yogg-Saron's method was to retain a considerable degree of the victim's cognition, leaving behind his most cherished memories, and then modify other aspects. After a period of time, slowly modifying his cognition and memories perfectly, he would become a brainless fan like Loken. Duke had racked his brains to see if there was a weakness in his heart that could cause him to suffer a serious mental injury. He summed it up for a long time and finally came to a conclusion. He was worried about gains and losses. With his current achievements and the perfect and harmonious harem, he could not bear to give it up. If there was anything he feared the most, it would be losing everything he had in Azeroth. Therefore, after Yogg-Saron expended a Herculean effort and used an undetectable method to bypass the protection of the system Elf and peek into Duque's memories, it was easy to imagine what kind of attack he would launch. Duque had set a trap for himself. If he recalled his memories of the Celestial Empire on Earth, then he would automatically activate the system Elf's prompt. This move saved Duque. Haha. Wang turned into a flaming skeleton in the fire. Duque calmly turned around. If he were to face this crazy skeleton, he would lose his sanity every second. He really wanted to light a cigarette, but unfortunately, Duque did not smoke. After some thought, a crystal glass made of frost elements appeared in Duque's hand. It was filled with psychedelic and colorful liquid arcane energy. Since it's a dream and I can't even open my storage space, then this is it. With a strange expression that was hard to tell whether it was a smile or a bitter one, Duque raised the glass in his hand high, and then let the arcane liquid drip onto the ground. The world of Warcraft used to be so beautiful. For it, some people climbed over the wall to go to the internet cafe in the middle of the night. For it, some people wrote novels for 2 hours every day and then worked in the World of Warcraft for 12 hours every day. For it, some people woke up in the dark to turn on the computer during the night shift in the factory at 3 in the morning just because Duque, the guild president of the guild, called them. Hello. XX, I'm online for a fight. Everyone had fun, played, celebrated, and been heartbroken inside. It had been more than 20 years since he entered the world of Azeroth, and that memory was already very distant. It was the end of an era. But for the traveler Duque, it was also the beginning of an era. Looking at the arcane liquor sprinkling in the air, Duque murmured to himself, "To salute our lost youth." Right? Duque would miss it, but he would not be infatuated with it. From the first day he came to this world, he had been engaged in a battle that even he thought he could not win, let alone the world. Facing powerful enemies that were as numerous as the stars in the sky, he had hesitated, doubted, and even almost retreated. But since he had never given up on this simple dream of a better life, the only thing he could do was win the final victory and create a legend that belonged only to me, Duque. Following Duke's murmurs, the dream in front of him seemed to respond to his words. The wall of the internet cafe disappeared without a sound. It revealed an enormous white jellyfish-like object floating in midair. That thing overlapped with the thing in Duque's memory. That's right, it was Yogg-Saron's brain, in charge of dreams. In a sense, it was also one of Isra's most powerful enemies. When Duque was the first to step into the Temple of the Mind, he was a little surprised. Almost at the same time, the other walls of the Temple of the Mind also disappeared within a few seconds, revealing the existence behind the walls. The first to come out was Sylvanas. As the Blood Elf Queen, she was graceful. Facing Duque's questioning gaze, she proudly raised her chin. A Nastrian's nightmare seems to want to use age to prove that its powerlessness and betrayal were not a mistake. I'm not afraid of old age. Even if I'm so old that I can't even pull a bowstring, I will still use my body to protect my people, even if I die on the charge. Duque was a little speechless, but then he felt relieved. Never bow to fate. Sure enough, this is the Sylvanas Windrunner I love. Theon was the second to appear. He shook his head. I met Arthas. In that dream, he seemed to want to justify his act of patricide. Unfortunately, I didn't listen. I've seen the kindest orcs and the dirtiest humans. Justice cannot be desecrated, and justice cannot be trampled on. Justice does not distinguish between races or borders. The nightmare has its principles, and I have my justice. As one of the 5 silver saints, Theon's belief was probably second only to Uther. As for him, Duque had nothing to worry about. Vashj appeared in the form of a human-faced Naga. She smiled bitterly. I met Queen Azhara, and she seemed to want to be my master. But 10,000 years is too long. I only have hatred for her. Also, the light of redemption in my heart woke me up. Chapter 1638. Vashj smiled faintly at Duque. Who was the savior? It was obvious. What surprised Duque the most was still the Black Dragon Princess. From Duque's point of view, Xianxia was definitely the biggest flaw in the Allied army's camp. Because she had no will to fight, it could be said that in this spiritual torture dream, her performance was far inferior to Duque's. If Theon or Queen Sylvia, who had the strongest willpower, had a willpower of 100, then Xianxia would at most have a 10. It was already giving face to Duque by not rating her as only a 5. In Duke's plan, they had to first break out of the dream and then ruthlessly beat up the brain that represented the core of Yogg-Saron's spiritual world a few times. Only then could they protect Xianxia by besieging the weak to rescue the weak. Who would have thought that Xianxia would actually settle it herself? The Black Dragon Princess had an unnatural expression on her face. As a creature connected to Duque's soul, Xianxia privately told Duque the truth through the spiritual connection. I met that damn dad of mine in the dream. He constantly threatened me. To be honest, I was very afraid at first. Not only did he torture me, but he also always boasted that I'm the strongest in the world. I always felt that something was wrong. And then I suddenly realized that he wasn't the strongest, and I have a master. My master had already killed my dad, whom I feared the most, and my brother, whom I hated the most. So at least my master is stronger than him. Duque laughed. Dragon Princess, your logic is stable. There's nothing wrong with it. So I suddenly wasn't afraid. Even if you want to deal with me, you have to deal with my master, Duque first. You specifically came to deal with me, your mount. What kind of ability is that? That was Xianxia's explanation. She didn't realize it herself, but actually her IQ had dropped quite a bit. It was only because her spirit wasn't heavily damaged that her mind didn't show signs of collapse. This was a great fortune in misfortune. For some reason, Duque felt that Xianxia, who wasn't that scheming, was actually a little silly and adorable. Damn it. In that case, would he still be able to harden his heart towards this fellow in the future and have sex with him whenever he wanted? It was naturally for the best that everyone was safe. The 5 powerhouses gathered at the spiritual core of the Yogg-Saron, which was its brain space, and naturally triggered a series of changes. Duque understood that it wanted a certain expert to rebel and cause the collapse of the Allied forces. But to lose 5 times in a row in the beginning, that was really laughable. After all, it had swallowed a total of 4 demigods into its dream in one go. It could easily swallow 10 epic-ranked heroes who had yet to step into the divine domain. Even with the power of the ancient heretic god, it would be strenuous to deal with 4 demigods. Despicable outsider. Despicable blasphemer. Do you think this is the end? In mid-air, the luminous jellyfish-like brain began to transmit a very strong telepathic message. A big move that used crazy thoughts as energy was being brewed. This terrifying spiritual energy had turned into a substance that could be seen with the naked eye. However, while it was accumulating this crazy urge, the final barrier that separated the various dreams from the Temple of the Heart was also opened. Perhaps Yogg-Saron also knew that such a weak barrier would not be able to stop these fellows who were like wolves and tigers for long. It would be better to give it its all and concentrate its most powerful spiritual energy to directly control these demigods. Then, it could turn the tables in one fell swoop. As strong as "there's a silly dragon" it was not an easy task to forcefully brainwash a demigod. If it could really brainwash them so easily, why would it need to slowly corrode Loken's mind and make him a traitor, knocking out his companions one by one and sending them to it? If it was really that powerful, wouldn't it just directly control all the guardians? Therefore, this kind of forceful, mentally retarding, had a huge drawback. For example, its spiritual energy would be greatly reduced. Another example was that this move had a very long time, as long as 60 seconds. This led to one result. The ideal was beautiful, but the reality was cruel. It was a big move right in front of everyone, and it was a big move that lasted for 60 seconds. If Yogg-Saron released all of this, Duque could change his name to Kidu. Beat him up. With her master's order, Onyxia, who had temporarily become loyal after being hit by the monkey-style retarding, was the first to transform into a dragon and rush forward. Without saying a word, she took a deep breath. The scorching flames, which were burning at an extremely high temperature, caused the ball of mental energy that was gradually gathering and growing brighter to flicker unsteadily. Servanas and Vashch, the two of them, opened fire with lightning arrows. Faced with a huge target that they could not defend against, there was no need for any rapid shooting techniques. The two female demigods slowly drew their bowstrings with all their strength in the aim and shoot position, injecting as much elemental power as possible into the arrows. Then, as if cutting through the entire temple of the heart, two arrows streaked through the void. The scene in front of them seemed to have been cut into 3 parts at once. Evil God, your destiny is destruction. Theon exhaled and raised Ashbringer high in the air. The broad blade was filled with golden holy light. He seemed to be using his actions to illustrate the saying, "Justice may be late, but justice will never be absent." The weak spatial structure showed signs of collapsing under Ashbringer's full force strike. The white tentacles that extended from the huge translucent brain all turned into ashes the moment they touched the golden holy light. The huge brain that had swelled to the size of half of the temple performed a real brain atrophy in front of the 5 people. To them, it was no longer a brain, but more like a dried walnut. When the 4 people looked at Duque laughed as if he was talking to himself or mocking them. You think you're invincible? Time is indeed a good thing. You were beaten up so badly by the Titans 25,000 years ago, and you've forgotten about it. In terms of strength, you're courting death if you jump out now. As he spoke, Duque finally used the long-awaited Song of Light and Shadow in his right hand. With the divine artifact Helix in hand, it shone with a dazzling golden light. Because the one who provided this divine energy was the real Archbishop, Alonsis Fail, the golden light of this divine artifact was slightly better than Theon's Ashbringer. Duque's smile grew wider. A brain is a good thing. I hope you have one. I'm not talking about this thing that only has capacity but no practicality. I'm talking about a real brain. With that, Duque turned into a magnificent light that lit up the entire temple and slammed into the huge walnut brain in the air. At the same time, the people of the Alliance who were fighting with the tentacles outside were pleasantly surprised to find that Yogg-Saron had finally revealed its true body. It was no longer in the spatial rift, but had truly descended into this world. They could beat it up now. Chapter 1639. To be honest, Duque really did not know where the ancient gods got their confidence from. If they had gathered together to cause trouble like in the ancient war 10,000 years ago, the Alliance army of Azeroth would not have been able to withstand it. Now that they had insisted on sending them one by one, Duque could only chuckle. However, thinking about it, it was not difficult to understand what they were doing. During the Dark Empire period 25,000 years ago, it was the era when the ancient gods and a few elemental lords divided up the ancient Kalimdor continent. It could be said that each had its own pit, and no one could do anything to the other. It was not easy to have a chance to dominate the world, so of course they would seize it. Fortunately, this was the case. Otherwise, if a few malignant tumors were left on the planet, who knew what kind of trouble they would cause in the future? If they ran out to cause trouble during the Burning Legion's general attack, that would be painful. Now, Yogg-Saron was forcibly pulled out from the void in an incomplete state. It looked like Duque and the others had blown up the blue cover around its body. For a moment, All the experts of the Alliance army poured their firepower on Yaxaron's huge and ugly body. For a moment, a violent storm formed by various elemental energies such as thunder, fire, frost, and holiness completely covered Yaxaron's huge and terrifying body. Unfortunately, it was only for a moment. In the next second, hundreds and thousands of ferocious mouths on Yaxaron's body opened at the same time and swallowed all the chaotic elements around it. It was like swallowing a piece of pudding, swallowing it with a gulp. This, not to mention the mortal experts, even a guardian like Torim had sweat on his forehead and was at a loss. If Yaxaron could even swallow such violent elemental energy, how could they fight? In unison, all the experts stopped what they were doing. At this moment, a blue halo bloomed on the flat ground near them. Duque came out of the portal with 4 experts and said, "Why did you stop?" "Beat him up. He swallowed all the elements." Gavin Rad said softly. Bullsh *T. Yaxaron is a demon of 1,000 throats, not an elemental demon god. Duque's eyes sharpened, and he turned to stare at Torim, who was the most shaken, and angrily rebuked, "Please. You're the guardian of thunder, not the god of hammers. What are you afraid of?" Although Torim didn't know what it meant to be afraid of a hammer, he was ashamed and angry at his momentary cowardice after coming to his senses. Even though he did not dare to approach Yaxaron, his long-range lightning attack was not inferior. Rumble. The continuous thunderous explosions completely suppressed all other sounds in this relatively enclosed huge shrine. Enraged, Yaxaron opened its 1,000 mouths full of sharp fangs and let out a deafening roar that even drowned out the sound of thunder. "Your laughable magic is not worth mentioning to me. Enough. I'm sick and tired of all these tricks. Accept the end that the great true God has bestowed upon you." Nearly 10 balls of brilliance floated on the shattered ground of the great hall. Of course, Duque knew what they were. He waved a tish and extinguished the openings of the space passage like a game of whack-a-mole. Yaxaron let out a mocking laugh. The next moment, more than 30 space passages opened at the same time. Duque's balls hurt. He wanted to seal them all, but there were too many. He could still make do with a few patches for the space, but when it came to the unstable space that was full of holes, Duke's efforts were in vain. "Be careful. It's the Immortal Guardian. I can feel their disgusting aura of death. Regular attacks can't kill them." Freya shouted a warning immediately. "If I can weaken them to a near-death state, I should be able to destroy them," Torim shouted. Torim, the king of Thunder's Titan Storm, had the destructive power of the Guardians. The Immortals destroyed by his ultimate lightning would be completely annihilated, from the body to the soul. This was the right arrangement. Duque frowned. Something was wrong. From the feedback of his space perception, it was not a simple Immortal Guardian. If the faceless leader that appeared before was the strongest group of faceless in active service, this Immortal Guardian was the strongest elite that appeared once in 1,000 years. With every 1,000 years as a generation, only the strongest faceless was left in each generation and was bestowed with Immortal. This was not a simple undead magic. Instead, Yaxaron constantly bestowed the most powerful living cell tissue, constantly replacing the decaying cells. At an extremely high price, they were kept in captivity until today. In the past tens of thousands of years, only a mere 20 were left. In the Battle of Titan's Descent, the former Immortal Guardians were all destroyed. These were all assets that Yaxaron had secretly accumulated with great effort. As soon as they made their move, there were signs of a reversal on the spot. Whoosh! On the octopus-like face, the beard-like tentacles on top, bottom, left, and right were breathing heavily. They were larger than the faceless leader. His burly figure, which was 8 stories tall, was only slightly shorter than the Guardians of Orger. Their eyes were crimson red, and they fought with their lives on the line. One of the Immortal Guardians pounced fiercely pouncing on Alkavon's waist. Like a wrestling match, it directly knocked Alkavon away. 2 of the giants rolled away, causing the ground to crack. The other 3 Guardians received the same treatment. As soon as 5 or 6 undying Guardians came out, They pounced on them recklessly and directly broke through the wall of giants that surrounded Yogg-Saron. These giants fiercely beat each other on the ground, causing the scene to become very chaotic. Logically speaking, this should have been a contest of great disparity in strength. The Overseer had greater strength and vitality, and there was nothing fancy about this exchange of punches that could be described as an exchange of punches. The Immortal Guardians should have died first. The Immortal Guardians had a rogue skill like Life Drain. Plus, Yogg-Saron would try to use a special skill called Shadow of Strengthening to heal the Immortal Guardians. Even more disgusting was that this skill could actually heal Yogg-Saron himself. "Pull them away!" Duque shouted. There were too many of these burly Immortal Guardians. Even Xianxia had to use her dragon form to block 3 of them. On the other side, Vashj blocked 2. Just as the scene was getting more and more chaotic, Yogg-Saron finally revealed his trump card. Without any warning, Freya and Hodier suddenly attacked Torim at the same time. And the robot V0L7R0N controlled by Mimiron poured all the firepower, including the P3WX2 laser barrage, onto Duque. Chapter 1640. No. Torim, who was caught off guard, had never imagined that his comrade, who had regained his sanity, would once again become Yogg-Saron's accomplice. Almost immediately, Torim was hit by the ultimate skills of the 2 guardians beside him. As a character who was good at wasting energy, Freya did not have any incisive attacks. She just used sunlight at the right time and blinded Torim temporarily. At first, Torim thought that his comrade had missed, until Hodier's instant freeze and freezing strike hit him hard in the chest. This set of skills was so incisive that Torim, who was strong in offense but weak in defense, fell into a state of serious injury again. How is this possible? Until this moment, Torim still did not understand what had happened. In contrast, the screams of Duque's harem were heard. Duque, seeing Duque's figure being drowned by the most powerful continuous firepower, many pretty faces turned pale. Several queens on the Azeroth continent screamed at the same time to explain their relationship with Duque. Duque was a demigod, and in theory he was immortal. But every demigod had their own special method of resurrection. No one had ever studied how to resurrect Duque. What if Duque died? Without Duque, how could they deal with the aggressive Arthas? Almost at the moment when Duque's aura disappeared, countless thoughts had already turned in the minds of the surrounding alliance leaders. No. Titan. What did I do? Freya covered her mouth in shock. No. Impossible. I can't control my own body. Hodier's face was full of horror. Meaning, this lost control. My mind, there's an unknown interference. Mimiron's entire body froze after releasing a round of big moves, causing the huge robot to stop as well. Everyone came to a realization. The despicable Yogg-Saron had never really let the 3 guardians out of its control from beginning to end. It was probably some kind of secret mind control technique that made the 3 of them change sides at the most crucial moment. A sturdy fortress would always be breached from the inside. Now they had demonstrated it with their actions. What was even more terrifying was that the 3 guardians were conscious, but their bodies were not under their control. Haha, I told you. I am a lucid dream. Monsters from your nightmares. If my mind control could be removed so easily, I wouldn't be called Yogg-Saron. The evil ancient god let out a wanton and sinister laugh. It wriggled its body, which was like a big ball, and kept using its protruding mouth to bite in all directions. In a moment of carelessness, a large piece of flesh was torn off Edwin Van Cleef's left arm. It was a heart-wrenching blow. However, this was not the end. More of Yogg-Saron's subordinates were summoned to the modern world. Elder Viticus was an Arachne elder who was highly respected by his compatriots when he was alive. However, following the fall of the ancient kingdom of Ankit, he also became a slave of the Faceless and indirectly belonged to Yogg-Saron. Now, as a useful supplement to the Faceless, he was directly summoned here. Almost as soon as he appeared, he used his best skills, Deadly Poison and Arachne Plague, to increase the burden on the allied army. Not only that, but more powerful creatures enslaved by Yogg-Saron odor appeared. The originally spacious hall suddenly became a pot of porridge because of the appearance of these guys. There were giants rolling and wrestling everywhere, and elemental magic flying everywhere. At this moment, the mortals were too insignificant. "Gather! Everyone gather!" Magni shouted at the top of his lungs. However, he, who had activated deity's descent and turned into a giant dwarf, was also entangled by an immortal guardian. Queen Sylvie ruthlessly gave that guy 3 thunder arrows, but it only reduced the guy's enhancement by 30%. It only made Magni feel less pain when he was beaten. Everything was in chaos. At this moment, a cold snort came from the void. Oomph! It wasn't loud, but it was like a light that pierced through the night sky and chaos, allowing the allied army to find their backbone in an instant. Only Duque could do it. Only he could make the guardians and mortals listen to him at the same time. Just now, the moment Mimiron locked onto Duque's retina had been flashing with the system's red warning light. The system elf might not be that sensitive to unknown mysterious magic attacks, but when it came to mechanical attacks, it was simply accurate and would never make a mistake. If he was hit by this, then Duque could just kill himself. Coming out of the void, Duque ordered, "Pull all the immortal guardians to the east and west sides. Sword Emperor suppress Hodier. Thaddeus interfere with Freya." A densely packed magic net suddenly appeared in the void. On the nodes of the magic net's elemental network, huge shining dots of light formed something similar to a portal. The elemental emissary and the Kiraji twin emperors that Duque had hidden for a long time finally appeared at this moment. The insidious Yogg-Saron was using the Guardian's identity. If the 3 of them completely fell, Torim might call on the allied army to kill them directly like he did with Loken. However, it was this controlled state that made the allied army the most cautious. At the very least, the allied army had to find enough experts to form an exchange with the 3 of them. Needless to say, Duque really had so many powerful subordinates. Sword Emperor Vecnala's magic immunity was just right to bully Hodier. Freya herself seriously lacked attack skills, so it was fine as long as she didn't use sunlight to interfere. Thaddeus was barely up to the task. As for Mimiron, Duque saw another guardian that was different from the others. This great inventor was indeed being controlled, but this incomplete control gave Mimiron an opportunity. After he locked onto and attacked Duque, he let his huge robot fall into an overloaded state. Without the robot, he was just a weak mechanical gnome. His self-imprisonment allowed Duque to free up more powerful fighters to deal with Yogg-Saron. The demon Emperor Veclock was waving the Kiraji scepter and killing everything in its path. His special immunity to physical attacks of the same level allowed him to attract the attacks of 8 immortal guardians without any qualms. It's the final stage. Be careful of the crazy skeleton's special skill. Long-range attackers, try not to look at Yogg-Saron. Such a big guy, you can hit him even with your eyes closed. Duque shouted. At the same time, he began to combine Nitish and Song of Light and Shadow together. Chapter 1641. The air was filled with chaotic auras. Roars, screams, scuffles, elemental explosions, and all sorts of other sounds mixed together, seriously interfering with the judgment of every master. Especially the mortal masters, they would be tricked half to death if they were not careful. After experiencing countless team battles, from the very beginning with Ragnaros until now, the Alliance's powerhouses had been growing. Whether it was their own strength, experience, or equipment. But this kind of fierce battle, which was many times more shocking than in monster movies, was still a headache. The 10-story tall giant and the monster were fighting endlessly, and the space for mortals to dodge to was quite limited. Especially Kalia, if it was in the past, if she couldn't escape, she could only use Holy Word, Shield, to hang in there. But now there was Jaina, who used the mage hand, inherited from Duque, to save the situation, saving many of her companions who didn't have high mobility out of danger. There were so many disturbances around him, but Duque's heart was as still as water. He had to focus all his attention, because he was performing a rather dangerous action. He was trying to temporarily combine two unrelated divine artifacts. Atish, legendary guardian staff, was a typical arcane magic staff, and Duke Marcus' Song of Light and Shadow, the spiral sword, was a standard holy longsword. These two divine artifacts were originally unrelated, and Duque wanted to cross the boundary of mystery and combine them. Even if it was temporary, this was also a very high-risk thing. If there was a choice, Duque didn't want to do this, but unfortunately, Yogg-Saron wasn't a simple ancient evil god. Back when Sardras was still a titan, he represented the pantheon to imprison Yogg-Saron. At that time, the imprisonment was actually not complete, because there was still a large amount of biological tissue tightly connected to the planet, and what was imprisoned was only its core. Now, this spatial cage was already riddled with holes. Even though he had just forced Yogg-Saron to the real world by attacking that brain-like spiritual core, it didn't mean that it couldn't return to the spatial rift that was no longer a cage. If he just attacked with Song of Light and Shadow, with full force, he could certainly heavily injure Yogg-Saron and even destroy most of its core. The problem was, what if he missed? None of the ancient gods were fools. When they really couldn't take it anymore, they would also shrink back. Once it retreated into the Titan cage, all the divine power would be depleted. No one doubted the vitality of an ancient god. For example, the last time they fought Thun, if it wasn't for the cooperation of Azeroth's star soul and the will of the star planet, Thun probably wouldn't have died so cleanly. If he wanted to achieve complete victory, he had to at least lock down its space so that it couldn't escape. This required the power of Atish, which was super powerful and had rare spatial properties. Atish itself was already very long. When it was propped up, it was as tall as a person. With such a long staff and a sword on top of it, the only shape he could think of was a spear. However, a staff head that looked like a crow but was actually shaped like a chicken drumstick was placed together with a spiral sword. No matter how one looked at it, it didn't look right. Not to mention that they were two completely different types of energy. At the end of the staff head and the sword hilt, there was an empty space the size of a palm. In that small space, the purple-blue that represented arcane energy and the gold that represented divine power were fiercely mixed together. It wasn't a fusion. It wasn't mixing. Instead, it was mixing into a ball. The most gentle and versatile arcane energy, which could be said to be the foundation of elemental magic, became extremely unstable under the influence of the divine power that was completely different and belonged to spiritual energy. It looked like that ball of light was the largest magic bomb. Once it exploded, regardless of whether Yogg-Saron died or not, none of the mortal powerhouses present would be able to survive. Impossible! It can't be done. Duque, don't mess around. Servanas turned pale with fright the moment he saw what Duque was doing. Is this possible? Torim, who was seriously injured, struggled to get up. The eyes of this guardian who had lived for 25,000 years were filled with disbelief. Mimiran's mechanical eyes flickered with an unknown light. Interesting. Kale, that's in Jaina, the two top-level mages who were determined to break through to the demigod realm, were shocked as if their common sense had collapsed. Why did Duque only do such a terrifying experiment at this juncture? And he went all out right from the start? Ha! You can't do it. Do mortals want to become true gods after stealing divine power? You're too naive. Little guy. Not to mention that you don't have enough power, even if you have enough energy. You can't control it. Yogg-Saron opened its 1,000 mouths wildly, each of them flashing with a cold light as they laughed wantonly. Duque suddenly laughed as well. That's not necessarily true. There's always a turning point in everything. If you can't do it, it's just that you haven't grasped the method, and your hands and feet are bound by your poor imagination. At this point, Yogg-Saron's power had undoubtedly weakened. From the moment it had been able to control the entire battlefield to the moment it was forcibly dragged into the modern world, its power had started to decline greatly. Although it was still very strong, it was no longer the super evil god from 25,000 years ago that could only be defeated by the strongest Titan warriors. The rapid decline of its power and the recovery of the four guardians allowed Du's magic net to invade the stairway of madness. With the Titan rune array passed down by Maligos and the Titan magic formula that Duque had secretly obtained from Alcafen's treasury, he had perfectly increased Duque's strength. A huge array unfolded behind Duque. Duque chanted a rare incantation. In the name of the Titans of the Pantheon, I swear before the soul of planet Azeroth that I, Duke Marcus, am the one who brings order to the planet, and it is my duty to kill all those who are chaotic and evil. Duque's voice was not loud, but it resonated with the tens of thousands of Titan runes behind him, causing the sound of the incantation to resound throughout Audor and even the snowy world of Northrend. Not only could Lich King Arthas, who was in the Ice Crown Glacier area, hear it, but even Muradin, who was fighting Ajo Nirab in the Dragonbone Wilderness, and William, who had already killed his way to Zudak, could hear it. On the entire continent, every powerhouse who had surpassed the realm of heroes or above could clearly hear Duque's incantation. The magic net became incomparably dense, and every inch of the magical network channel flickered with the radiance of the elements. The elements of the four great elemental realms were frantically extracted, compressed, refined, and finally gathered in the magic net. When the magical energy resonance in the entire stairway of madness reached its peak, a bright beam of light pierced through the magic net and poured into Atish. Chapter 1642. No, that's impossible. You're just a demigod, how can you control such a huge amount of power? Looking at the arcane energy that was as dazzling as lightning, Yogg-Saron finally panicked. The essence of lightning was the wind element. It was very difficult for a single basic element to deal a fatal blow to Yogg-Saron. However, the origin of the arcane element, the Titan energy, was even more mysterious. In front of a true spatial master, Yogg-Saron's act of hiding back in the cage was actually quite ridiculous. Every evil god was ambitious and ruthless. An ambitious person did not care about integrity, so when Duke poured an overwhelming amount of arcane energy into Atish, Yogg-Saron decided not to gamble. Its huge body, which could not fit an entire football field, actually became a little illusory and transparent at this moment. That's right, it began to shrink back into the cage. Even this state could not be maintained for long. Not only that, its largest mouth was like a huge eye that began to stare at Duque. Crazy gaze. This evil ultimate move would cause a huge amount of special shadow damage to the target, as well as terrifying mental damage. Even Duque would not dare to take it head-on. After taking this move, Duque would also become brainless. Just because Duque did not dare, did not mean that someone did not dare. In front of Duque, a holy figure opened his arms, and with his semi-illusory golden body, firmly blocked in front of Duque. The complex golden array containing divine power also opened in front of him. Alonsis Fail, Duque's biggest trump card against Yogg-Saron. This respectable old man, the deceased, with his noble and selfless spirit, still used his soul to protect Azeroth even after his death. He could not completely resist the attack of an ancient evil god, but with help, it would be completely different. Teacher. 25 years later, Tyrion Fordring and Gavin Rad-Doom, the two of the 5 Silver Sages, were once again standing behind their teacher. Duque narrowed his eyes. The scene in front of him made him feel as if time had flowed backward. That year, the 5 Silver Sages were still uncles. Although a certain Gavin Rad had become bald and stronger, his original intentions had not changed. The two of them, master and disciple, were still standing at the forefront of the fight against evil. Thank you. Duque uttered a soft murmur of thanks. The 3 of them heard it. They turned their heads slightly and nodded in acknowledgement. No, I am the king of Azeroth. This world is mine. You damned guardians and mortals, don't even think of stopping me from conquering. Yogg-Saron was still shouting crazily. Every single one of its mouths opened and closed vigorously, producing a metallic clanging sound. In Duque's eyes, it was more like the lamentation of a dog. It's very ugly. Yogg-Saron, please behave like a real evil god and die obediently. At this moment, Duque's divine weapon combination, which looked like a counterfeit version of the spear, suddenly changed. The two energies that were constantly mixing and seemed as if they would explode at any moment suddenly achieved a balance, as if they had reached some secret deal behind the scenes. They were suddenly at peace with each other. The energy between the tip of the staff and the hilt swirled endlessly, looking like the yin and yang fish of the Taiji diagram. The golden holy light was still golden, and the purple-blue arcane spell was still the same, but outside the holy power rippling outside the spiral sword, there was an additional layer of mysterious titan energy. The tip of Atisha's staff was a crow with its wings retracted. But now, the wooden crow seemed to have a life of its own. It spread its wings, and then its beak turned upward, gently embedding itself into the bottom of the spiral sword's hilt. It looked like the intersection of the two divine weapons was a specially made spear edge. What the hell? For some reason, Duque thought of the holy spear Longinus. The spear of Longinus, also known as the spear of destiny. Holding this spear in his hand, Duque suddenly felt as if he was in control of his destiny. He was not the only one who felt this way. Onyxia, Vashch, and other subordinates of Duque who were fighting the immortal guardian at the side all felt the same way. Without a second's hesitation, Duque exhaled and shouted, Yaxran. Accompanied by the shout, Duque threw the combined divine weapon with a standard spear-throwing posture. No. Yaxran's biggest mouth moved left and right crazily. It pulled more spatial curtains in front of itself in an attempt to escape from this incomparably terrifying spear. Unfortunately, it was completely useless. Even though it crossed an unknown amount of space, the counterfeit version of the spear of Longinus was still like a spear of light. After piercing through an unknown number of layers of spatial barriers, it accurately pierced into Yaxran's head. Gianna's voice was almost sleep-talking, because she saw that Atish had actually acted as a booster. The real killer move still fell on Song of Light and Shadow's head. Of course, she did not know that Duque's move was inspired by the Celestial Empire's multi-stage rocket launch system. Even if they could not make an entire space rocket, they should be able to make a multi-stage rocket, right? The incomparably sacred golden light looked so simple and unadorned that even Duque himself felt that the light was similar to the light of a flashlight. Perhaps because they were separated by too much space, even though it looked so close, no one could sense any energy fluctuations in this attack. That's Gianna, Solarin. All the mages present felt a cleansing of their imaginations. The common sense of magic that they had learned for so long told them that any element would weaken. There was no element that could leave the control of a mage and cross space, or even space jump, without elemental loss. Duque used the energy of the Titan runes as a cover, perfectly avoiding the loss of energy. There was not even a trace of overflow. This kind of magical attack that could not exist in theory had truly established Duque's position as the god of the weave. Only this was Duque's true creation, a godly technique that surpassed the entire Azeroth magic structure. In the deep, dark space, the remnants of the sacred golden light were still emitting residual light. They were still releasing residual power, destroying the tissues of the evil god that was filled with dark energy. Yogg-Saron, the ancient evil god that had existed since the era of the Dark Empire and had lived for tens of thousands of years, was now a corpse. It quietly floated in this increasingly narrow space, its surface covered with a faint layer of death aura. This was a cage that the Titan of the Pantheon had personally created. At this moment, the outer wall of the cage that seemed to be deep in the void was covered in cracks. Occasionally, small fragments would fall from the void wall amidst the soundless vibrations, floating in the space. Along the cracks, one could see the fragmented scene of Otter. 3 minutes later, the cage broke and Yogg-Saron's huge corpse fell into Otter's crazy stares. Chapter 1643. The dome above the crazy staircase hall looked like a void because it was connected to another space. Following the fall of Yogg-Saron's massive body, there were also countless body fragments falling from the void. There were disgusting fragments, as well as shards of fangs that flickered with a metallic luster and were stained with blood. Because of the spatial dislocation, there was a strange error in the transmission of sound. It was not until Yogg-Saron's body fell that the final scream full of hatred and resentment was heard. Suddenly, the entire hall shook. It gave people goosebumps all over their bodies. However, this belated scream formed the most distinct contrast with the tragic state of this ancient god. The lower half of Yogg-Saron's body had completely disappeared, leaving only the upper half of his head and most of the largest mouth. On the upper half of the skull, every mouth of different sizes was half open and half closed. There were even unknown substances flowing out of the oral cavities. Almost at the same time that Yogg-Saron disappeared, the immortal guardians on the field all stopped moving. Then, as if weathering, their bodies collapsed without a sound. Their lives had ended as early as 10,000 years ago. It was purely Yogg-Saron's evil divine power that protected their souls that had already begun to decay, constantly replenishing their biological tissues, that allowed these terrible faceless ones to survive until now. As the core Yogg-Saron died, so naturally they also fell. At the same time, the three guardians who had once again lost control also returned to normal. Almost immediately, Freya and Hodier rushed angrily towards the dimensional rift that Yogg-Saron had fallen out of. As soon as they entered, they used powerful Titan magic to sweep away the countless broken limbs and corpses. They were so furious that the onlookers had no doubt that if there were any remnants of Yogg-Saron at this moment, they would not hesitate to start a new round of war. It was just that, it was time to end it. A moment ago, the battle on this battlefield was so intense. The next moment, everything returned to silence. This extremely intense contrast gave everyone an illusion that it was unreal. Is Yogg-Saron dead? Kalia walked over and quietly pulled on Duque's sleeve. I can only say that the core part has been destroyed. Duque smiled bitterly. In Azeroth, the few ancient gods were all classified as aberrations. There was not even a specific race to classify them. No one knew if they could reproduce or if they could resurrect. Back then, even the Titans, who were omnipotent in our eyes, were unable to completely destroy the few ancient gods, including Yogg-Saron. This time, I'm really not sure. I can only say that in the next 100 years, Yogg-Saron probably won't come out to cause trouble again. Duque shrugged. What about 100 years later? I hope I'll still be guarding Azeroth at that time. If we're not here, we can only hope that our descendants can produce another talent who can lead the mortals to kill it again. Duque was right. Unfortunately, Duque was still used to thinking like a mortal and didn't notice his faulty wording. Because of this small sentence, Kalia's face was as red as a steamed prawn, and she had a fever. She lowered her head in embarrassment. On the other side, Torim walked over. On his shoulder was Mimirin's main body with a rocket backpack. Walking up to Duque, Torim knelt down on one knee so that his face could be closer to Duque. Duque noticed that Torim was still clutching his chest. How's your injury? It's nothing serious. As long as I go back to the Temple of Storms, I'll be fine after a few years of recuperation. Thank you for your concern, Torim answered truthfully. Not only him, but the other two guardians and the 4 guardians of Alcafon's treasury also came over. Thank you and your companions, Duke Marcus. Without your help, Otter would have fallen into that damned evil god's lair. Freya was a little embarrassed, but she still bowed deeply to Duque and the others. Beside her, the other 3 guardians and 4 guardians also bowed in unison. In order to express our gratitude, Yogg-Saron's collection, as well as ours, are all yours. Hodor was a man of few words, but when it came to practicality, there was nothing more practical than this. This feels good. Gavinrad was the first to take the lead and exclaim. Fighting against evil was for the sake of justice and the future of Azeroth, but mortals always needed spoils of war to embellish a great victory. Under Duque's leadership, instigation, the Alliance's powerhouses had long since gotten used to looting wherever they went. If they went through so much trouble to defeat an evil god without any spoils of war, they would probably be able to accept the result, but they would probably grumble about it for a long time when they returned. Okay, everyone take a break. Before Duque could finish, suddenly, his expression changed along with Torim and the other guardians. At the farthest end of their perception, it was the sky above Otter. Above the sky was the endless universe. At this moment in time, the universe was experiencing an unusual change. It was a staggered layer of space. On the surface, it looked a little like a huge teleportation door that was opening from an extremely distant planet to Otter. It was just like when Dan used the space coordinates provided by the possessed Medivh in Draenor to use the dark portal to open a space passage between two planets. In reality, in Duque's perception, it was completely different. It was as if the black hole on the other side of the multiverse had suddenly connected to the universe here, and the black hole that should have devoured everything was expelling something. Of course, in astronomy, this could also be called a white hole. Some extremely powerful existence was tearing through space, crossing dimensions and rushing here. F***CK. I actually forgot about him. He was observing Orgaren. He was an observer left behind by the Titans, an imperial envoy who came to purify the world in case the planet was accidentally corroded. In order to prevent Orgaren from discovering his crimes, Loken had modified the data. The observer would only descend when he died, formatting Azeroth so that all living beings would be buried with him. This was the big hole that Loken, whose mind had been completely corroded, had dug for the living beings of Azeroth. Although he knew that in this life, it was Torim who lured Orgaren away, but Duque still wanted to say to Orgaren, "I bought a watch last year. Damn it, why didn't you come earlier or later? Why did you come out to cause trouble when we were fighting Yogg-Saron? If it was earlier, it would have been good to get Orgaren to help fight the ancient gods. If it was later, at least everyone could rest for a while and recover some vitality." This guy, appearing at this point in time, it was really amazing. Chapter 1644. Torim's face turned ashen. Not only him, but all the Guardians' expressions turned gloomy. What's the matter? Magni noticed that their reactions were not normal. Freya said something that shocked the Alliance's powerhouses. Letting Yogg-Saron escape is tantamount to dereliction of duty. When the observer Orgaren arrives, he may remove our Guardian qualifications on the spot. By the way, removing our qualifications is equivalent to destruction. Torim continued, "Remember what I said? If Orgaren determines that planet Azeroth has been completely polluted, he will send a purification signal to the Pantheon, which is to destroy the entire planet." The Alliance's powerhouses were all worried about Torim's words, but for the transmigrator Duque, he could only play the role of a good actor again. He looked like he had deliberated for a long time before saying these words. What if we guys who don't belong to the Pantheon go and communicate with Orgaren, and ask him to give up sending a signal to the Pantheon? As soon as Duque's voice fell, Gavin Rad, Magni, and the others were already making a ruckus. Even Queen Sylvanas tightened her grip on her divine longbow. If these guys were to really form an empire or something, the name of that empire would be Empire of Troublemakers, right? In the face of this group of bold mortals, or rather, mortals who had become gods, Torim rolled his eyes. As Odor's guardians, we will decisively kill any existence that does harm to Odor. On the other hand, we have no right to stop you from communicating with the emissaries of the Pantheon. But in case you have a conflict with Orgaren, and Orgaren orders us to purify you, we will not hesitate to obey the order. Because this is our duty. Torim had a businesslike look on his face. Duque bared his teeth. What the hell, Torim, you're quite sly too. You speak as if you're not the one who delayed Orgaren for so long? Since Torim was speaking in a bureaucratic manner, it was almost as if he was hinting at Duque and the others. Duque also understood. Duque raised his hand, and Atish immediately flew back under his arcane control. He looked at his divine staff and said, "Our communication with Orgaren must be secret and will never be made public. I hope that the Guardians will abide by their confidentiality rules. I'll give you a look, and you'll figure it out yourself. We'll beat him up so badly that even his mother won't be able to recognize him. We'll make sure that no one can hear him even if he screams his lungs out. Just pretend to be ignorant." Mimiran's mechanical eyes flickered nonstop. The Titans didn't leave us behind because they didn't expect us to stay the same. They are also eager to see changes and new possibilities, otherwise they wouldn't have arranged for me, the creator. This was also a hint, and several guardians and watchers nodded in response. Duque suddenly felt a little admiration for the group of dead people from Pantheon. One had to admit their greatness. The Titans could actually create such a group of powerful creations with self-awareness and self-values out of thin air, yet they had firm wills and scrupulously abided by their duties. Under normal circumstances, the Guardians would never overstep the duties set by the Titans. However, their wills were able to strike a perfect balance between their desires and their duties. The Titans were definitely worthy of the title of Creator. You should get a platinum disc from the Iron Parliament, Mimiran reminded them. This? Gavin Rad took it out. This is called the Archive Data Disc. Mimiran said as if he had no idea what was going on, and then refused to speak again. Duque smiled and patted Gavinrad's shoulder. Everyone understood that this thing was the key to the place where Orgaran descended. However, the Guardians and Watchers could not help Duque and the others against their own Imperial envoy. This was the biggest weakness. Everyone's heart was actually a little uneasy. Duque could not say it out loud. After all, this was quite a taboo. All right, let's quickly divide Yogg-Saron's collection, then have a good chat with Orgaran. Time is a little tight, so I'll make the decision myself this time. Duque once again acted as the leader of the Black Hand Group and went to divide the equipment. All right, no problem. That's it. This time, there were no tribal powerhouses participating in the battle. They were all on the same side, so there was nothing to be embarrassed about. As an ancient god that had lived for tens of thousands of years, especially during the Dark Empire period, Yogg-Saron enjoyed the tributes and sacrifices of countless believers as a god. There were many treasures that it would never use and carried in its portable space. With the destruction of Yogg-Saron's core, this portable space also collapsed. Duque rushed to rescue the items before this small space collapsed. This wave was actually quite rich. Jaina obtained the dagger Scar of Soul. This dagger was shaped like a double-headed greatsword, but it was actually quite small. There was a green rune energy flowing in the middle that looked like a question mark. No one knew if it came from a warrior who had fought for the Titans back then, because this was a pure Titan rune magic sword. Because it had a structure similar to arcane energy, it could provide Jaina with a large number of additional magic circuits, directly increasing the strength of her spells, casting speed, and spell critical rate by quite a bit. Vanessa obtained Godslayer's emblem Fring. This not only provided her with a large increase in agility, but it was also proof that she had slain a god. Edwin Van Cleef obtained a Kingslayer. Although the name was not nice, this sharp dagger gave him a real boost in attack power. Magni took the king's royal family emblem without any dispute. This defensive accessory came from an unknown king, and it was stained with blood that could not be washed off. Even after countless years, it still seemed to prove that king's determination to protect his country. Most of Yogg-Saron's drops were loose items. Basically, if anyone saw something suitable, they would raise their hand and equip it on the spot. If they were worried about any curse or unsafe shadow energy residue, they could just ask Freya to purify it. It was a piece of cake. Duque also changed his equipment for the first time in a long time. At the level of a demigod, generally speaking, unless it was a divine artifact, there was nothing worth Duque taking. Whether it was worth it or not was one thing, and whether he wanted it or not was another. Duque obtained the False God's boots. This wasn't the original name of the boots. History books were written by the victors. Since Yogg-Saron had knelt, it was a false god. There was nothing special about these shoes. The important thing was the extraordinary horror shoulder accessory. Chapter 1645. This epaulette was quite eye-catching. On the inward curved, crescent-shaped epaulette was a pink light shield similar to the outline of the epaulette. This not only provided additional magical defense, but it was also blindingly bright like a neon light. It was as cool as it could get. Back then, The friends who played with Duque had fought over this item countless times. With it, Duke could be considered to have fulfilled a small wish. When the equipment was almost distributed, there was only one accessory left that no one wanted. This thing. Duque saw it and understood why everyone had strange expressions. This small pants-like accessory was the claws of the conquered Yogg-Saron, and as the name suggested, it could summon a tentacle of Yogg-Saron to fight for oneself. Most of the biological tissues that belonged directly to Yogg-Saron had collapsed and died, which was an exception. It was more like a certain mighty power during the Dark Empire had cultivated a part of the detached limb of the god it worshipped through special means, turning it into a single tentacle that obeyed its commands. Hey, Duque, didn't you already have one of these last time? Since you like this, why don't you take it and make a pair? When Gavin Rad said this, he was completely unaware that almost all the women present were looking at him like he was a cockroach. And then Duque was implicated. It was an awkward but polite smile. Behind his back, Duque wished he could strangle Gavin Rad's big mouth. That's right, Duque did get an accessory, Thun's tentacle, before. If he took the claws of the conquered Yogg-Saron, then he would have two items that were deeply loved by gentlemen. As a result, the way Duque's own harem looked at him changed. One by one, their pretty faces stiffened. Silently, they all stood together, forming a firm alliance. They were clearly saying, Duque, if you dare use them on us, just wait for the harem to explode. Duque looked back with a despairing look and asked, do I look like such a guy with such a heavy taste? The 5 people at the core turned their heads in unison, looked at Vashch, then looked at Onyxia, and then the 5 of them nodded in unison, clearly saying, yeah, that's right. The affairs of the world were unpredictable, and the human heart was unpredictable. We didn't know you were such a hardcore guy, otherwise we wouldn't have followed you. Woo-woo, Dumuk burst into tears. For a moment of carelessness, he couldn't control himself, and now his world-renowned reputation was lost in a single day. I don't want to live anymore. All right. The death of a fellow Daoist is better than the death of me. It's not fair that I'm the only one who fell into the pit. Duque's expression was solemn as he called Gavin Rad and Kale, that's over. Now, as the commander of the Alliance, I will give you an arduous and long task. This is for you. After saying that, Duque gave Thun's tentacle to Kale, that's and Yogg-Saron's claw to Gavin Rad. Gentleman Dumuk's face was stern. The Alliance needs you to thoroughly understand these 2 defeated ancient gods and see if there are any remaining living organisms left in the world. Or, you can try to see if you can develop a tool to detect the remnants of the ancient gods. One of you is the Alliance's most revered great paladin, and the other is the wisest Kirin Tor chairman. The Alliance can rest assured by handing this task to you. Gavin Rad seemed to have received an order to immediately do a handstand, and his bitter face revealed clear despair and frustration. On the contrary, Kale, who didn't know what was going on, accepted the task seriously. Phew. With the problem solved, Dumuk let out a long sigh of relief. All right, let's go have a good chat with Sir Orgarin. After distributing the equipment, everyone was elated, and their combat power increased by another level. Perhaps this was the so-called sharpening the knife while chopping firewood. With Mimiron leading the way, the Alliance powerhouses and Duque's subordinates majestically charged towards the observatory. As an observatory built by the Titan himself, of course, it wouldn't just be a huge telescope or something like that. Although it was called an observatory, it was actually more like a huge astral teleportation center. Stepping into this magnificent and huge hall, one could see many 3-dimensional star charts floating in the void. The spatial passageways connecting the planets were also clearly marked. The moment they saw the observer Orgarin, other than Duque, all the Azeroth powerhouses were stunned. On the surface, Orgarin was a humanoid existence, a standard giant body, with a fluttering robe and a clear human face. In reality, no one could tell what kind of existence he was. Because everyone could see through his translucent body, they could see the bones in his body. It was said to be a skeleton, but it was actually a series of connected lines that looked like constellations. These bright blue and white spots of light and light formed an endoskeleton that looked like a matchstick man, supporting the entire huge and seemingly light body. Should be an elemental creature, Duque concluded. Who are you? Orgarin was rather surprised by the arrival of Duque and the other powerhouses. Where are Odor's protectors? I can feel that they are still alive. Why would they allow you to come here? Duque stepped out from the crowd, smiling as he bowed deeply to Orgarin. Hello. Your Excellency Orgarin, please allow me to introduce you. We are the Azeroth Coalition Army. We represent the various native intelligent races that were born on this planet, and we are here to negotiate with you. Those who could become Imperial envoys were no fools. Orgaron's translucent face revealed a rather human-like expression. Can you first tell me what happened to the ancient evil god Yogg-Saron that was imprisoned in Odor? I can feel its presence, but it is the presence of death. I'm sorry to inform you that it has corrupted the mind of the King of Wisdom, Loken, and controlled him. Then, it used Loken's hand to destroy Odor's cage, and was freed for a time. However, with the efforts of Odor's protectors and us, Yogg-Saron's core has been destroyed by us. Oh, that's good news. But what are you doing? Why you here? Don't think I didn't notice your little trick. Orgarin suddenly became stern. Duque smiled. He did not plan to hide it from the other party. Such a large commotion like the sealing of space could not be hidden from anyone. We just hope that we will not be mysteriously purified. Oomph. Orgarin snorted coldly. I have witnessed countless worlds being baptized by the Creator. The people there accepted their fate without even shedding a single tear. In the time it takes for your mortal heart to beat, countless planetary systems would disappear in a brilliant light. But until now, I have no feelings for them, no sympathy, I can't feel anything. Millions, billions of lives have returned to dust. Why should I agree to your request? Chapter 1646. Every Azeroth powerhouse was stunned. Arrogance. Arrogance. Boasting of being high and mighty. Was this the observer sent by the Titans? Treating billions of creatures as scum. Although everyone understood this logic, just like how humans regarded ants and other insignificant life forms as nothing, just like how humans felt that slaughtering livestock such as pigs, cows, sheep, and other livestock was a matter of course. After the Guardian's explanation, everyone also knew that planet Azeroth was the Titan's life cultivation ground, but it was really F***king annoying. Even beasts resisted the hunting and slaughter of humans due to their survival instincts, let alone highly intelligent creatures. Observing Orgaron's mockery, it could be said that he had easily pulled the aggro of everyone present. Towards such an amusing idiot, Duque only wanted to describe him with the words, "You have a lot of ideas, you must be an idiot." Ever since the Dark Portal incident started the Age of Turmoil on Azeroth, the Alliance had always had close cooperation and communication with the Titan Guardians represented by the Temple of Dragon's Slumber. For the sake of Alexstrasza and the other dragon aspects, as long as Orgarin was still a guy who could speak and communicate normally, the native Azeroth powerhouses present would not have done anything extreme to him. Now that Orgarin was courting death, Duque could only chuckle. If this Imperial observer with the Imperial sword was as strong as Kill, Jaden, or Yogg-Saron, then it would still make sense. After all, powerful people naturally had the right to do whatever they wanted. However, Duque knew very well that this guy's level was quite limited. If it wasn't for the fact that everyone was worried that he would issue the purification order at the drop of a hat, which indirectly bound his hands and feet, this guy would probably have turned into ashes long ago. Now, the mana retroaction from Duque's left hand, Atish, told Duque that the space blockade had been completed. The Oscar winner Duque's face darkened. Orgarin, you've already completed the calculation and assessment of Azeroth? Almost as soon as Duque's voice fell, all the powerhouses were shocked. Before coming over, Torim repeatedly emphasized that they had to find Orgaron before he completed his assessment of the planet's condition. He had to convince him to change his mind and not issue the purification order. Now that Duque suddenly asked, everyone's hearts were in their throats. Olgarin, who had light rays from the stars that formed his internal skeleton, still had a rich expression on his half-illusionary face. It's done. I am quite disappointed with the evolution and results of this planet. It had already been 25,000 years. Not only had the perfect creatures that the Titans hoped to see not been bred, even more corrosive, rotten, and ugly creations had been born. What's even more unbelievable is that the Guardians, who were supposed to abide by their duties until the end of the universe, have also fallen. Orgarin said seriously, that's why I came to the conclusion that this planet must be completely purified after 3 minutes in this world. I've already sent my report. You lowly indigenous creatures, just wait for the Pantheon to descend again and then disappear from this universe completely. Foliage *T. The moment the observer said this, the Alliance experts were the first to explode. Damn it! How can you be so unreasonable and reckless? The Empress Dowager was infuriated. You decided the survival and destruction of billions of creatures on an entire planet with just 3 minutes of observation? Magni's beard was standing on end. What's the difference between you and a destroyer like Sargeras? If the Titans are all like this, then we won't hesitate to fight against the Titans. Sylvanas raised her Solidar Wrath of the Stars and knocked an arrow made from the power of the stars, aiming it at Olgarin. Faced with the anger of the crowd, Orgarin showed no fear. He stood proudly with his hands behind his back. Foolish indigenous creatures, you know nothing about the power of the Pantheon. What he meant was, the Titans can do whatever they want to you. At this time, Duque stepped out from the crowd. Perhaps we don't know much about the power of the Titans of the Pantheon, but we've dealt with the Burning Legion, and we know that Sargeras, the Titan warrior of the past and now the fallen Titan of the Burning Legion, has been running amok in this universe for 25,000 years. Not only did he lead the Burning Legion to destroy thousands of planets, but I also know that he fought a fierce battle with the Pantheon back then. When Duque said this, everyone finally saw Orgarin take half a step back. Duque put the most weight on the table. I just want to ask, if the Pantheon is still here, where are the Titans? Are they willing to let the fallen Titan who betrayed them roam the universe freely? Or is the Pantheon actually destroyed? To Orgarin, Duque's words were not only harsh, but also outrageous. Orgarin waved his hand. How dare you? I'm the supreme representative of the Titans. You have no right to ask me any questions. Duque sneered. How many years has it been since you last contacted the Pantheon? It must be 25,000 years, right? If the Titans were still here, we wouldn't have needed to set traps to kill Archimonde and kill Jaden and kick Sargeras into the bottomless abyss. After saying that, Duque opened his hands, and 3 magic images immediately hung above Duque's head, appearing in front of Orgarin. They were Duque stabbing Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras' soul in Karazhan, Duque stabbing Archimonde to death in Mount Hyjal, Ilun giving kill to Tidin the final blow in the sun. This incomparably magnificent and soul-stirring scene made Orgarin tremble with fear. However, Orgarin, who was used to looking down on all beings, was not willing to admit his guilt and weakness. As an observer with his own will, he had long been used to his transcendental status. He would never admit that a native of a planet had the strength to beat the Burning Legion. He still argued, we can make as many of these fabricated images as we want. And how could the great Pantheon lose to a traitor like Sargeras? His disdain completely angered the Azeroth powerhouses. The sneer on Duque's face became even more pronounced. All right then, negotiations have broken down. We can only resort to force. Duque raised his hand and gave a simple order like a mafia boss. Beat him. This time, to everyone's surprise, the one in the lead was actually Onyxia. I knew it. That bullsh *T Guardian isn't a good thing. Duque stared. Aren't you mistaken about something? You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.